hideout, and overall had himself a glorious time. A shame those days were behind him. Well, all but the drinking part. Without his sword, he felt naked traversing Angelport's streets. Big as he was, he doubted any ruffians would be dumb enough to try hustling him. That, and he certainly didn't look like a man loaded with coin. But he liked having his weapon with him anyway. All it'd take was one bad turn, one lucky snot with a dagger and a hungry belly, and he'd go from Laurie Keenan's trusted mercenary to just another rotting hunk of meat to be cleaned up by the city guard. Thankfully, he encountered no one on his way home. The streets were strangely quiet. Laurie had mentioned something about the elves. Perhaps that was the reason. The whole city stank of nervousness. At the gates to the Keenan estate, he saluted the single guard keeping watch. "Mornin'," Torgar said. "Not for 4 more hours." Torgar grinned. "Aren't we picky?" The guard looked him over. "You're early. And where's your sword?" "On loan. Care to let me through?" Drunk or not, Torgar was still the boss, and the guard begrudgingly turned and unlocked the gate. "Take the servants' entrance, at least," the guard said. "Lady Madeline's getting tired of you waking her up." "That's so, eh?" Torgar asked, heading straight for the front doors. "Too fucking bad." Halfway across the expansive lawn, he began singing a tune, butchering half the lyrics but not caring. When he put his hand on the door handle, he stopped and sighed. Laurie's son, Terrace, slept not far from the main entrance, and he'd been having a devil of a time catching winks because of his newborn. Madeline could rot in an open grave for all he cared, but he held a soft spot for Terrace. "Fine," he said, thudding his head against the thick wood of the door. "You owe me, bud." He left the main path and walked the worn dirt track around the mansion. Compared to their first home in Veldaren, it wasn't nearly as large, but it housed over 50 members of the family, plus guards and servants. Torgar spotted a couple hiding behind a tree, no doubt a guard and a maidservant having themselves a good time. He resumed singing to startle them, and grinned while imagining their surprise. Their lack of reaction left him disappointed. Worse, something about it felt wrong, and he looked back just before turning a corner. Neither was moving. "Gods damn it," he muttered, trying to think through his pounding head. "Asleep, right? Just asleep." He went to check them anyway. Slumped against the tree, with their bodies positioned in a mocking embrace, were 2 guards, their throats slit, their armor soaked with blood. Torgar stared at them for a full 3 seconds as the alcohol in his brain gave way to his many years of training. He grabbed one of their swords, and then checked his immediate surroundings, in case the killer lurked nearby. When he saw no one, he hurried toward the back door. So far, no alarm had been raised. Otherwise, the guard at the gate would have known. The bodies were warm, blood still dripping from their wounds. Whoever this killer was, he wasn't far. The ground seemed vacant enough, so he looked to the rooftops, desperately wishing he hadn't drunk so much. He saw several shadows that might have been men hiding, but with his headache it was impossible to know whether his mind was playing tricks. No time, he decided. Raise the alarm. Get every guard armed and scouring the place. He was in no position to play hero. The servant door was locked, and he pulled out the key from a chain around his neck. As he inserted it and turned, he felt the hairs on his neck stand up. One of the shadows. "Shit!" he cried, flinging himself back. A dark shape descended, blade in hand. Torgar blocked with his sword just in time. Before he could react further, his opponent landed on top of him, elbows and knees ramming his face and chest. Collapsing onto his back, Torgar rolled, narrowly avoiding a stab to his throat. He continued rolling and did the only thing that seemed logical. He hollered his brains out. "Killer!" he screamed. "There's a killer out here! Wake the fuck up!" He pulled out of his roll and onto one knee as his opponent's sword came slashing in. He tried to parry it and was only partly successful. Blood splashed across his vision as the edge tore through his face. He spun from the force, landing on his stomach. Teeth clenched. He waited for the killing blow to land. It never did. Looking back, he saw the door was open, his key still in the lock. "You left me alive?" Torgar asked, struggling to his feet, his free hand clutching his face. "Big mistake, you bastard. I'll make you pay." He felt warm blood spilling across his fingers and mouth. A huge gash across the bridge of his nose was bleeding heavily, and he wondered if he'd pass out before the night was done. Cursing, he cut off a large portion of his shirt and pressed it to the wound. It hurt like blazes, but it was the best he could do for now. Sword held high, he rushed into the mansion. The hallway was mostly dark, with only small oil lanterns burning at the various intersections. He had no clue who this assassin was targeting, but Torgar knew who paid his wages, and that man belonged at the top of the list to protect. Hooking a right, he headed for Laurie and Madeline's room. He tried shouting for help, but it hurt his nose too much. His eyes watered, hampering his already blurred vision. Several times he rammed into a wall, adding more bruises to his aching body. All throughout, he heard cries from the guards. Most were tracking positions, calling out all clears. But every few moments, they let out frightened shouts, if not death screams. Reaching Laurie's room, he felt hope at seeing the door closed. He kicked it open and barged in, only to have something hard and blunt strike the back of his head. Torgar dropped to his stomach, and he vomited uncontrollably. "Damn it," Torgar said, glaring at Laurie standing to the side of the door, dagger in hand. His wife sat on the bed, also holding a blade. "I thought you were the intruder," Laurie said, offering his hand. Torgar ignored it, instead using the wall to brace himself as he stood. "You're an idiot, Laurie. Why the hilt?" "I wanted you alive for questioning." Torgar looked back to the hallway, listening for sounds of battle. "Next time, use the pointy end," he said. "Stay in here and bar the door." A trio of guards approached, and Torgar saluted with a hand holding the bloody bandage. "Any clue where the fucker is?" he asked. "Toward the front," one said. Torgar's ears were still ringing from the blow, his vision so blurred he couldn't make out the man's face. He took a wild guess at his name, not caring if he got it right. "Stay here, and guard them with your lives," Torgar said, nodding toward Laurie's door. "Gary, you're in charge." "Where are you going?" asked the one on the left. "To make him pay for this," Torgar said, gesturing to his nose. He rushed toward the front half of the mansion, and sure enough, he heard sounds of battle. His gut sank at the noise. This was no normal assassin sent to smother a sleeping man or pour poison into a bottle of wine. This guy could fight. Torgar listened for steel hitting steel or people dying. All around him, he heard doors locking, the servants barring their rooms and staying inside like he'd trained them. Good. Last thing he needed was a bunch of frantic idiots crowding the halls. As he neared the front entrance, he stumbled upon 5 corpses of his guard, their blood staining the blue carpet. Torgar could hardly believe the sight. Surely it wasn't just one man doing all this. And then he heard a scream. "Taris," he whispered, his blood running cold. It took him a moment to remember the way. Gods, what he'd give to be sober. He passed by 3 more dead guards, confirming his dread suspicion of the assassin's target. Despite the pain it caused, he screamed as loud as he could. "Everyone to Taris! To Taris! Now move your asses!" At his friend's bedroom, he found the door already open. A dead guard was propped against it, the wood's white paint stained red with gore. Heart in his throat, Torgar stepped inside. Despite his years of training, warfare, and executions, he was still not prepared. The assassin knelt amid the carnage, his sword deftly slashing at a bare spot on the floor. Torgar must have made a noise, for the assassin looked up. His face was hidden by a heavy black hood, his body wrapped in cloaks. Torgar lifted his sword. "Come on," he said, wishing he felt as tough as he sounded. "Come, die, you sick fuck." The assassin stood, and his head shifted so Torgar could see a faint glimpse of his face in the dim moonlight streaming through the broken windows. He was smiling. "Not tonight," the man said. Smoke burst at his feet, flooding the room. Torgar coughed as it stung his eyes and throat. He slashed wildly a few times, but no attack came. When the smoke cleared, the man was gone. Torgar walked to the center of the room, creating footsteps in the drying layers of blood. His sword shook in his hand. Terrace and his wife, Julie, lay dead and in pieces. Their maidservant's body was slumped against the closet door, her throat opened by a gash that went from ear to ear. As Torgar's heart caught in his throat, he heard a horrific sound break the silence. Their newborn girl, Tori, wailing. Guards flooded the room as he picked up the child from the stained bedsheets. Her wrappings were bloodied, but she was unharmed. "Where'd he go?" a guard asked as the others gasped and cursed at the sight. Torgar shrugged, having no answer. "Like a damned wraith," said another. "We'd see him, and then he'd be gone." Hearing a cry, Torgar looked back to see Laurie fall to his knees before the doorway. Madeline stood behind him, her face like glass but for the tears that ran down her cheeks. They dared not enter, for there was no reason, no way to clutch the bodies to their chests. The massacre was too horrific, too complete. "Who?" Laurie asked. "Why?" Torgar looked to the symbol at his feet, drawn in Keenan blood. "I dunno," he said. "Give her to me!" Madeline cried, her sudden outburst startling. Torgar carefully stepped across the gore-coated floor, gladly handing Tori over. All he felt was rage. Having a child in his hands didn't seem right. "I'll find out who did this," he said. "I promise I'll make him pay 1,000 times over." Little comfort for any of them, but it didn't matter. The assassin had left his calling card, and because of that, it would be his death. Few crossed a member of the trifect and lived. As Laurie and Madeline were led away from the scene, Torgar stabbed his sword into the center of the symbol, which seemed vaguely familiar. He'd seen it before, years ago, or at least heard it discussed. And then it hit him. A single open eye drawn in the victim's blood. "The Watcher," whispered Torgar. Chapter 1. Haern pulled his hood low over his head and tied his sabers to his belt. As the leader of the Eschaton mercenaries, the wizard Tarlak, sat at his desk and watched. "Do you want our help?" Tarlak asked, picking a bit of dirt off his yellow robe. "No," Haern said, shaking his head. "This one needs to be a message for the underworld of the city. Bran crossed a line that I need to make sure no one else ever crosses. I'll do this on my own." Tarlak nodded, as if not surprised. "What about Elisa?" Haern tightened the clasp of his cloak. They'd heard word that Elisa planned some sort of retaliation against the thief guilds, though the reason was unclear. Their source was fairly respected in the Gemcroft household. So much so they had no choice but to take it seriously. At some unknown point in the night there was to be a meeting at her mansion to discuss the circumstances. "After," Haern said. "I'm sure you understand." "I do," said Tarlak. "Good luck. And remember, I can't pay you if you die on me." "I won't be the one dying tonight," Haern said, feeling the cold persona of the King's Watcher coming over him. He left the room, descended the staircase to the tower's exit, and then ran the short distance toward the city. A dozen secret passageways, ropes, and handholds were available to him as a way to cross the wall, and he drifted to the southern end before climbing over. Elisa's potential conflict with the thief guilds was a greater threat in the long run, but Haern could not bring himself to focus on it just yet. His target was a piece of scum named Bran Goodfinger. He operated in the far south of the city, and it was there Haern went. Normally he felt pride as he traversed the rooftops, carefully observing the doings of the various guilds. Ever since the thief war ended 2 years ago, the factions had settled into an uncomfortable truce. The first few months had been the worst, but Haern's sabers had spilled torrents of blood. Through sheer brutality, he had brought both sides to their knees. He was the silent threat watching all and tolerating nothing. But tonight his accomplishment felt bitter. For the first time, his plan had been turned against him in a most cruel, personal way. Thieves who stole from the trifect died. They all knew this, knew that every night Haern patrolled the city as the king's watcher to ensure the agreed-upon peace. And so Bran had recruited children, a bold dare against the watcher's threat. "Where is it you hide?" Haern whispered as he lay flat atop a roof. For 2 days Bran had eluded him, and his children had gone unchecked. No longer. He spotted one of their youngest, a boy surely no older than 7. He was exiting the broken window of a shop, a handful of copper coins clutched to his chest. He ran, and Haern followed. The boy tried to vary his pattern, as he'd no doubt been trained to do, but against someone like Haern the tactic was a minor inconvenience, nothing more. Haern kept far out of sight, not wanting to alert him to his presence. Twice he'd tracked Bran's child thieves, but one had spotted him, abandoned his ill-gotten coin and fled. The other had been killed by a different thief guild before he could question him. Children bled out on the streets of Veldaren. The Watcher's wrath would be terrible. Haern turned a corner and watched the child hurry inside a warehouse. Approaching the door, Haern slipped into the shadows and looked through the crack near the hinges. A faint lantern burned inside, and from what he could make out, 2 other children were within. Hoping it was Bran's hideout, and not a simple gang of orphans, he drew his sabers. There would be no stealthy entrance. This wasn't a time for quiet deaths in the night. He slammed the door open with his shoulder at full charge. Without slowing, he took in the surroundings, his finely honed instincts guiding him. The storehouse was full of crates and bags of grains, limiting his maneuverability. At least 20 children were gathered in a circle, and before them, his dirty face covered with a beard, was Bran. The man looked up. His jaw dropped, and then he turned to run. "Stop him!" Bran shouted to the children. Haern swore as they drew small knives and daggers. He leaped between them, twirling his cloak as a distraction. A sweeping kick took out 3, and then he pushed through the opening. The storehouse was divided in 2 by a high wall, and Bran vanished through the doorway in the center. Haern raced after him, again slamming aside the door with his shoulder. To his surprise, Bran was not the coward he'd believed. His sword lashed out from behind the door. Haern's speed was too great, though, and he fled beyond Bran's reach, pivoted on his heels, and jumped again. Bran was only a gutter snake, a clever bully who relied on size or surprise to defeat a foe. Haern had fought his kind, knew their tactics. With 3 strikes, Bran's sword fell from a bleeding wrist. 2 kicks shattered a kneecap, and then he fell. Haern clutched his hair and yanked his head back, his saber pressing against Bran's throat. "How dare you?" Haern whispered. His hood hung low over his face, and he shook his head to knock it back. He wanted Bran to see the fury in his eyes. "You hold the city prisoner, yet ask me that?" said Bran. Haern struck him in the mouth with the hilt of his saber. As Bran spat out a tooth, the children rushed through the door, surrounding them both. "Stay back," Bran said to them, and he grinned at Haern, his yellow teeth stained red with blood. There was a wild look in his eyes that made Haern uncomfortable. This wasn't a man who cared about life, not his own, nor that of others. "What game is this?" Haern asked, his voice a cold whisper. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Yous and children. Here? In my city." "Your city?" Bran said, laughing. "Damn fool! All the rest are scared, but I know what you are. They think you're as bad as us, but you're not. Not yet. Once the thief guilds find out, they'll have your head on a spike." He gestured to the children, all prepared to attack. Haern didn't want to imagine what Bran had put them through to achieve such a level of control. "Kill me," Bran said. "Do it, and they'll swarm you. You won't die. You're too good for them, but you won't escape without killing at least one. So what'll it be, Watcher? Can you take my life, if it means taking the life of a child." Haern looked at the 20 children. Some were as young as 7, but others were maybe 11 or 12. All it'd take was one lucky stab by any of them and he might go down. His saber pressed harder against Bran's skin. He leaned closer to whisper into his ear. "Nothing, Bran. You know nothing about me. You die, they go free." "I die, then innocents will as well. You don't have the stomach for it. You aren't the beast the others think you are. Now let me go." Haern glanced at the children, all poised to act. He tried to decide what to do, but he knew what life someone like Bran would lead them to. No matter what, no matter the risk, he couldn't allow it. "This was never a choice," Haern whispered. He slashed, spilling blood across his clothes. Hoping to move before the children reacted, he turned and leaped, vaulting over their circle. They gave chase, not at all bothered by the death of their master. Haern rolled to his feet, his sabers crossed to block their weak stabs. A quick glance showed no exits except the door he'd come through. Doing everything he could to fight down his combat instincts, he shoved through the group's center. His cloak whirled and twisted, pushing aside feeble attacks. Pulling out of the spin, he lunged for the door. One of the older boys was there, and Haern felt panic rise in his chest as he saw the deadly angle of the boy's thrust. He reacted on instinct, blocking hard enough to knock the dagger free, then following it up with a kick to send the boy flying. Breaking back into a run, he kicked off a pile of crates to vault into the air, catching a rafter with one hand. Swinging himself up onto a perch, he stared down at the children, several of whom gathered around the body of the one he'd kicked. "Listen to me," Haern said to them, trying to forgive the children's attack. They didn't know any better. The rage he felt was misguided, born of frustration. "Your master is dead. You have no hope of winning this fight." "Fuck you," said one of the kids. Haern swallowed down his anger at such disrespect. They were frightened and living in a world Haern knew all too well. If reason would not work, he knew what would. "Say that again, and I'll cut out your tongue." The boy stepped back as if stunned by the coldness in his voice. The rest looked up at him, some ready to cry, some angry, but most were heartbreakingly indifferent. Haern pointed to Bran Goodfinger's corpse. "Take his coin," he said. "Go, and make better lives than this. Remain thieves, and you'll fall to the guilds, or to me. I don't want to kill you, but I will. There is no future for you. Not in this." "None for you either," said another, but Haern could not tell who. With practiced efficiency, the children took everything of value from Bran's corpse and vanished into the streets. Haern didn't know where they went, nor did he care. He only felt fury. Bran had died quickly, hardly the example Haern desired to set. As for the boy he'd kicked... He dropped from the rafter, landing lightly on his feet. Gently he rolled him over, put a hand on his neck. No pulse. "Damn you, Bran," Haern whispered. "I hope you burn forever." Leaving the body there was not an option. Haern considered himself better than that. Lifting him onto his shoulder, he rushed out to the streets, praying no gutsy member of a thief guild spotted him and tried something incredibly heroic and stupid. There were several gravekeepers in Veldaren, plus another who burned bodies instead of burying them. Haern went to the burner, picked the lock of his door, and went inside. The owner was asleep on a cot in a small room, and Haern woke him with a firm prod of his saber. "What? Who are—" "Oh, you." The elderly man, Willard, rubbed his eyes, then opened them when Haern dropped a handful of coins onto his lap. "Spare no expense, and bury his ashes." "Who was he?" asked Willard, looking over the boy's body as Haern set him down on the floor. "An accident." "Then what shall I engrave on his urn?" "Pick something," Haern said as he left. In a foul mood, he raced off for the Gemcroft estate, wishing he could put the prior events out of his mind and knowing there'd be no such luck. Bran's death would still be a warning to the others against using children to break the arrangement between the guilds and the trifect. He'd accomplished that, though not how he'd hoped. But it was that nameless boy who haunted him, made his insides sick. Bran had been convinced Haern would not have the stomach for what might happen. Turned out he might have been right. Scaling the fence around the Gemcroft estate was easy enough, though avoiding the guards was another matter. There was a secondary building in the back, where he'd been told a meeting would take place. Most of the patrols kept close to the mansion, which helped tremendously. Haern lurked beside the gate, running along it when outside the patrol's vision and lying flat amid the shadows when they passed. At last he reached the small building. Timing the patrols, he knew he had about 30 seconds to slip in and out without being seen. Faint light burned within. He pressed his ear against the door and heard no discussion. Too late or too early? The door was unlocked, so he opened it and slipped inside. The room was surprisingly bare, containing only a single bed atop a padded floor. Hardly the servants' quarters he'd expected. The lone lantern kept the place dimly lit, with plenty of shadows in the far corners. So far, it appeared empty. "Damn," he whispered. He headed for the far corner, figuring to wait a few hours just in case the meeting was yet to transpire. In the center of the room, though, he stopped. Something in the corner wasn't right. The shadows not smooth. Haern lunged for the door, his instincts screaming trap. Before he could get there, something latched onto his cloak and tugged, hard. He spun to the ground, torn between attacking and tearing his cloak free to flee. Already furious because of Bran, he kicked to his feet and attacked. To his surprise, his sabers clashed against long blades, his thrusts perfectly blocked. He was already preparing a second strike when he saw his opponent's outfit. Long dark wrappings covering her body, all but her shadowed face. "Enough, Watcher," said Zusa, her slender body contorted into a bizarre defensive formation. "I am not here to kill you." Haern pulled away, and he put his back to a wall, the door at his side. "Then why are you here?" he asked. "Because I desired it," said a voice at the door. Haern turned, then dipped his head in a mock bow. "Lady Gemcroft," he said, "it is good to see you, Elisa." The ruler of the Gemcroft fortune smiled at him, not at all bothered by his tone. Zusa sheathed her daggers, though her hands remained on their hilts. She joined Elisa's side, her dark eyes never leaving him. Elisa seemed relaxed, far more so than when Haern had last seen her. Of course, he'd been trying to kill her at the time, back when Elisa was flooding the streets with mercenaries. She wore a slender dress underneath her robe, her red hair let down loose about her shoulders. Haern almost felt flattered she'd dressed up for him, as if he were some noble or diplomat. "I was told of a meeting concerning the thieves," Haern said. "Was there any truth to this?" "I assure you, Terence is loyal to me and me alone," she said. The side of Haern's face twitched. Terence had been his informant, of course. He felt at a disadvantage, with no clue as to the reason for their meeting. He didn't like that. The two also blocked the only exit. He really didn't like that. "Then I was told a lie, just to bring me here," he said. "Why is that, Elisa?" "Because I want to hire you." Haern paused, then laughed at the absurd notion. "I am no pawn for you to force your will upon, and if what you say is true, why this secrecy and deception?" "Because I don't want anyone, not the guilds nor the trifect, to know. I leave for Angelport, and I wish for you to accompany me and Zusa." Haern's hands fidgeted as they held his sabers. Answering such a request with someone as dangerous as Zusa blocking his way out was not his idea of a fair bargaining position. "What reason could you possibly have?" he asked. "I assure you, Zusa is quite capable of keeping you alive." A bit of impatience finally pierced Elisa's calm demeanor. Someone broke into Laurie Keenan's home, slaughtered his son and daughter-in-law along with a dozen guards. I'm going for the funeral services, as is appropriate. I want you and Zusa to hunt down this killer and bring him to justice while I'm there." Haern shook his head. "I can't leave Valderan," he said. "The peace I've managed to create—" "Is no peace at all," Elisa said. "The thief guilds prey on each other, killing themselves in an endless squabble over the gold we pay them. The few that steal are more often caught by their own kind, not you. No one will know you've left, not for weeks. It's been 2 years, and you've spilled enough blood to wash the city red. Those who remain have settled into their comfortable lives of bribes and easy money, and you know it. You've become a figurehead, a watcher against only the most reckless of the underworld. The city's changed. It won't miss you while you're gone." Haern did know that, but that didn't mean he liked it. "This is your problem," he said. "I've had enough dealings with the Trifect to last a lifetime. Find your killer on your own. Now let me through." Elisa glanced at Zusa, then nodded. They stepped aside. As Haern walked out into the night, Elisa called after him. "They found a marking," she said, "drawn in their blood." Haern stopped. "What of?" he asked. "A single eye." Haern turned, and he felt his anger rise. "You would accuse me of this crime?" "No accusation," Elisa said, stepping out. "I have already looked into the matter and know you were in Valderan both the night it happened, plus the nights before and after. Laurie's kept word of it a secret and told only those closest to him of its presence at the murder. He knows you didn't perform the deed, though he still fears your involvement somehow." Grinding his teeth, Haern tried to think through what any of it meant, but it left him baffled. "This makes no sense, Elisa," he said. "Why would someone frame me so far away? I've never been to Angelport, nor used that symbol for years. Not since the war between the Trifect and the Thief Guilds ended." "It's not a frame," Zusa said, as if it were so simple. "It is a calling. You're being summoned, Watcher." Haern tried to think it over, but he felt so tired, so unprepared. The dead boy's face kept flashing before his eyes. "How do I know this isn't a trap?" he finally asked. Elisa looked away, as if embarrassed by what she had to say. "Because of you, my son lives," she said, "and because of you, I was able to bring vengeance to the one who tried to kill him. I will never betray you. Someone murdered powerful citizens of Angelport, my friends and colleagues, and is using their blood to send you a message. Help me find him. Help me stop him." Haern sighed. "So be it," he said. "When do we leave?" "Today?" Tarlac said, leaning back in his chair with a bewildered look on his face. "You're leaving today? But we still have that contract with the Hessians, and I haven't tracked down that damn prostitute killer Antonio paid us to find. How am I supposed to find the bastard without your help?" "Start spending time with prostitutes." "Well, more time." Tarlac raised an eyebrow, then laughed. Still in his bedrobes, he stood and gestured about his office, which was a haphazard mess. "Clearly this place will fall apart without you," he said. "But go and do what you must. Can't have someone giving you a bad name, after all." They embraced, Tarlac smacking him on the shoulder. "Don't get killed on me," he said. "I'll try not to." Haern exited the room onto the circular staircase of the tower. Heading up a floor, he entered his barren room. After stripping down to his underclothes, he slipped into bed and slept. When he awoke, it was to something poking him in the shoulder. He looked, then groaned and rolled over. "You're risking death, Brugh," he muttered. "You're the one heading off after someone brave enough, or dumb enough to taunt you," said the short, burly Smith. "Besides, the day's almost over. Get your ass up. Oh, and I have something for you." Haern rubbed his eyes, then looked again. Brugh stood beside his bed, a pair of shoes in hand. "Shoes?" he asked. "Not just shoes," Brugh said, flinging them at Haern. They smacked against his chest. "I've spent 2 months making them things for you, so you can show some damn appreciation." Haern sat up and examined them. They were gray, made of soft cloth thickened on the bottom. They would muffle any footsteps, though he wondered how long they'd endure his chaotic sprints across rooftops. "You made these?" he asked. "I didn't know you could sew." Brugh blustered, and his neck went red. "That's not the point," he said. "With Tarlak's help, there's a bit of magic in them. They won't wear out, but the real fancy part is they'll make your footsteps quieter than a mouse's. Forget it. No reason I should tell you. Find out on your own." He stormed for the door, stopping only when Haern called out for him. "Miss you too, Brugh." "Whatever," Brugh grumbled, but he hesitated before leaving. Once he was gone, Haern dressed, put on his soft leather armor, and prepared to leave. Down the stairs of the tower he went, into the warmly lit and furnished bottom floor. It was empty, the fire in the fireplace burning low, the padded couch bare. Frowning, Haern swallowed his disappointment and exited the door. Delicia was waiting for him outside, leaning against the tower with a smile on her face. Her soft white robes were immaculate, her red hair pulled back into a ponytail. "Planning to leave without saying goodbye?" she asked him. He shrugged. "Thought you'd be waiting for me inside." "You still left when I wasn't." He had no answer to that, so he smiled at her and stepped close so she might embrace him. When he tried to pull back, she held him tighter still, and he was surprised by her sudden boldness. "You be careful," she told him. "Tarlak told me everything. Anyone who can do what that wraith person did and then taunt you for it is someone to worry about." "Fearing for my safety, are we?" Haern asked, trying to make light of her worry, and trying to ignore how much having her hands wrapped around his neck made his heart jump. "I fear every night you go out on watch, but this time I won't be waiting for you should you get yourself hurt. Please, be careful." No making light this time. He put his arms around her waist and pressed his forehead to hers, the tips of their noses touching. "I promise," he said, smiling. "It's going to take more than some cowardly pretender to take me down." "Good." She pressed her lips to his, and after a stunned moment, he kissed her back. When it ended, she stepped away, dipping her head so her hair fell forward to hide her blush. When she spoke next, it was as if everything were fine and normal. "Is that all you're bringing?" she asked, gesturing to his single outfit, his sabers, and the cloaks he carried in his hands. "Yes," he said. "Why? Something wrong with this?" "Ever the poor boy," she said, laughing. "Good luck, and make sure you come back." He bowed low. "I wouldn't dream of doing otherwise," he said. "Keep Tarlak in line for me while I'm gone." "I'll do my best." He headed down the pathway toward the main road south, a bounce to his step. The daylight made him feel uncomfortably exposed, but he did his best to quell the feeling. Once he reached the main road, he found Elisa's caravan waiting. It was only 3 wagons, far smaller than he expected. Elisa had told him she wished to leave with little fanfare in hopes the thief guilds would not find out. Turned out she wasn't kidding. He found her sitting in the first wagon with Zusa beside her. They both tilted their heads as he approached, and he realized without his hood and under the bright sun, they could clearly see his face. "Watcher?" Elisa asked, as if to confirm, just in case. "Haern," he said, standing before them. "That'll do for now." Zusa offered her hand, and he took it. "To Angelport?" he asked as he sat across from them. "Indeed," Elisa said before calling out the order for their driver to begin. Chapter 2. Erevan used the cover of night to hide his exit as he put the walls of Angelport far behind him. Spring had officially come, but the air still had a bite to it, and he kept a thin cloak wrapped tightly about him as he followed the path north. Though he'd lived for centuries, for the first time he experienced the sensation humans called feeling old. His joints throbbed in the cold, and the days seemed to pass ever faster. Though his elven skin was smooth, he knew that in another 100 years or so he'd start to get a few wrinkles on his face, and his time among the humans would be at an end. Not that he'd miss them. The signal was subtle, just a few leaves placed in a specific way, with pebbles atop them to ensure they did not scatter in the wind. Erevan left the path, climbing up a nearby hill. On the other side was a tent, without a single torch or fire to give away its location. He tightened his cloak, then approached. The tent was large, the front flap open. When he stepped inside, he bowed to the two elves waiting for him. "It is good to see you again," said the first, a young elf barely 100 years old. His hair was short and golden, his eyes a vibrant green. Erevan accepted his embrace. "You as well, Maradun," he said before turning to the other, who remained seated. "Does your leg trouble you so much that you cannot stand, Sildur?" The silver-haired elf waved a cane, the only sign that he walked with a limp and that he was even older than Erevan. "We have much to discuss, and little time to do it," Sildur said, motioning to an empty seat before him. "Sit, and tell us what the spoiled children of the brother gods have to say." Erevan sat, and he accepted the cup and pitcher Maradun offered. He drank, purposefully delaying his report. Sildur might have outranked him back in Quelazar, but they were in human lands now, and Erevan was their ambassador. His importance could not be denied. That, and Sildur was always a dour one, as if Celestia had made him with mud in his veins instead of blood. "Talks are yet to officially begin," Erevan said, setting down his cup. "What I know is only bluster and promises, which humans possess an infinite capacity for. But in this, I do not feel they will back down. Either we grant several of the human lords access to our forests for hunting and chopping, or prepare for bloodshed." "Blood has already been shed," said Sildur. "More blood, then." "Can we not come to some sort of compromise?" asked Maradun. He glanced at the two of them. "Surely they do not desire war?" "Humans always desire war," Sildur said, fire in his voice. "You know what they did to our Desran brothers, chased them halfway across the continent and burned Desaria to ash. Their desire for war runs deep in their veins. All our talks are nothing but a waste of time." Erevan sighed. Sildur spoke the truth, no matter how harshly. He only echoed what they all knew. "I see little choice," Erevan said. "We must cede parts of the forest to them. It should be enough to sate their appetites, as well as calm their lord." "Ingram is a fool who pales at the very sight of us," said Sildur. "He will not be calmed until we are dead and gone from all of Desrel." "But what else can we do?" Maradun asked. "I have slain several who came to our forests with axes, yet every week their numbers increase. What do I tell my masters in Quelazar? We continue to overlook many excursions, hoping to prevent escalation. But we must come to an understanding soon. Humans cannot trespass upon our lands forever, not without consequences." "There is another way." Sildur's eyes sparkled. "Instead of running from war like frightened children, we embrace it. Turn our bows and blades toward their cities. The humans are like animals, and will learn only when struck." The three fell silent. Erevan put his hands upon the table and forced himself to keep calm. Sildur said nothing he had not heard 1,000 times before over the last decade. Against that, he had the same tired argument, but no matter how tired, it remained truth. "We might slay 10 to our 1, he said, "but our numbers dwindle. While the humans spread like insects, we must not forget the lesson of the blood brick, where our greatest died. Despite the thousands our casters killed, the humans have recovered, while we will never see those 10 replaced in our lifetimes. No matter our skill, there is little we can do when they come with fire and pitch, outnumbering us over 100 to 1. You cannot stop a swarm of ants with an arrow or a blade. If we come as the aggressor, their king will send troops from every corner of Neldar. Our people, our loved ones, will die for nothing." Sildur's eyes flared wide, and he opened his mouth to argue, but then stopped. Erevan felt a chill pass over him, and he turned, following his companion's gaze. A man was hunched at the door, his body covered with dark clothing and a long cape. A sword hung from his belt. Despite Erevan's excellent night vision, his eyes could not penetrate the deep shadow across the intruder's face. Only his mouth and chin remained visible. He was smiling. "Who are you?" Sildur asked, his hand drifting to the long dagger at his hip. "Speak your name!" The intruder let out a chuckle. "I've heard many amusing names given to me, but if you insist, I will choose one of them for you. I am the Wraith." "Wraith?" said Sildur, hardly impressed. "What brings you here with your face masked and your identity hidden?" The Wraith jumped from where he stood, landing atop the table with a clatter of cups and silverware. A hand on the hilt of his sword, he grinned at them all. "Why do you discuss in secret?" he asked. His voice was strangely soft, and would have been charming if not for how coldly amused he sounded. "Do you fear the ears of man? Do you plot his downfall? Or wonder for a way you might go crawling to lick their boots while somehow maintaining your dignity?" Erevan prepared to draw his own sword. He would endure no insults from such a disrespectful whelp. "I don't know how you found—" He stopped as the Wraith whirled on him, staring with unseeing eyes. The intruder grabbed his face with his fingers in a movement so fast Erevan did not have time to react. "I found you by following the stench of cowardice. You leaked piss all the way here from Angelport, like a frightened dog." Marodun stood, a sword flashing in his hand. "Let him go," he said. The Wraith laughed. "As you wish." He shoved Erevan aside, then spun atop the table. His foot lashed out, the heel smashing Marodun's face before he could lift his sword to block. Erevan drew his sword and slashed, but the Wraith pulled his own blade. As the sound of steel rang out, the elves fled from the table, standing at the far reaches of the tent. Only the Wraith remained in the center, turning so his back faced none of them for long. "Do you fear me?" he asked. "Good. Then perhaps you will remember the message I bring." "What is that?" Erevan asked, stealing a glance at Marodun, who clutched his face with his free hand, blood dripping between his fingers from what Erevan guessed was a broken nose. "Do not ask if you don't intend to listen, Erevan." The Wraith leaped, his body changing from relaxed to taut in an imperceptible moment of time. Erevan blocked his brutal chop during the descent, but his skills were with words and schemes, not blades. He parried the next few swings, then overextended to block what turned out to be a feint. Before the other two could come to his aid, the Wraith's sword pierced his side. Gasping in pain, Erevan fell to one knee. When the Wraith pulled the blade free, blood poured across the grass. "Don't do anything foolish," the Wraith said, turning on the other two. "I will kill you all if I must." "Speak," said Sildur. "Give your message." Erevan tried to stand, but his head felt light and his muscles refused to cooperate. He collapsed onto his side. Beneath him, the grass warmed from his own blood. With fading vision, he watched the wraith approach, his footfalls frighteningly silent. "You are not wanted," the wraith said, grabbing Erevan by the hair and lifting his head back so they might see eye to eye. "Leave tonight. The people here do not need your meddling. Stick to your forests. One day axes and fire will come for your borders. Remember that the next time you think of returning to Angelport." Erevan's vision was nearly dark, but he still saw Maradun launch himself into an attack. The wraith let him go, then twirled, his sword a blur. Erevan felt something wet splash across him, and then Maradun fell clutching a bloody stump, his arm gone from the elbow down. Trying to stand, Erevan succeeded only in rolling onto his back. The wraith stood above him, looking down, still smiling. His sword sliced into Erevan's flesh, never deep. The sharp stings were nothing compared to the deep ache in his side, but still his anger grew. "We'll kill you for this," he said, coughing. "Many will try," the wraith said, his sword twirling in his hand, flicking blood all across the tent. "But not you." The blade descended straight for his eye. "There it is," said Elisa, hopping down from the wagon. "Angelport." Haern followed, and as the rest of the travelers set up camp, he looked out over the city. It was smaller than Veldaren, but not by much. 3 walls formed concentric circles enveloping the city, all of them stretching out into the water. A sprawling port lined the far side, and in the light of the setting sun, at least 100 boats shifted about like ants. Haern was stunned by the sight. He'd never seen a single ship before, so to find so many coming into port or sailing out for the far reaches of Desrel impressed him greatly. "Why do we camp here?" Haern asked. "The city is not far." "Because I want to make sure you know your part in this charade," Elisa said, looking him over, then sighing. "Gods help me, you couldn't appear more uncomfortable if you tried." Haern rolled his eyes and then went to help the others unpack. They'd kept a small supply of kindling and firewood, replenishing it as needed during their journey. Once their bonfire was roaring and tents set up for those who would not sleep in the wagons, the servants began cooking their meal. One continued on the path, sent to receive word on the state of the city. All the while, Elisa drilled Haern on customs. "Deepen your bow depending on their station relative to you," Elisa said, smoothing out his silk shirt. "Since you'll be a distant relative of mine, that means nearly every member of nobility and the trifect is significantly higher than you. If in doubt, bow low and avert your eyes for only a brief moment. Just make sure you don't ever tip your head to a commoner. Kind words and greeting are fine, but don't overdo it." "I'd rather stick to killing people," Haern said. "Can I do that instead?" She gave him a look he'd seen many times on their journey. The first had been when she realized he had packed a single set of clothes to wear for months at a time, his dark gray shirt and pants coupled with his cloaks. Wishing he'd heeded Alicia's advice, he found himself inheriting a wide assortment of outfits from Elisa. They were poofy, silken, and more expensive than anything he'd ever owned in his life. And they itched. Elisa continued grilling him, seemingly determined not to risk the slightest error. "Who rules the city?" "Lord Ingram Merband, pompous, overconfident, legally responsible for all the lands south of the King's Strip known as the Remir." "Who actually rules the city?" "The 6 men known as the Merchant Lords. Over the past 10 years they've slowly taken over Laurie Keenan's shipping empire, and if not for Laurie's control over the growth and sale of Crimleaf, he might lose the rest of his vast wealth. Of course, I'm to be annoyed by such ridiculous rumors about Laurie going broke, since I'm a silly, dumb relative of yours who cannot think for himself and would never accept the idea of someone else being wealthier or better off than us." Elisa rolled her eyes at his gross oversimplification of her original identity she wanted for him. "Tell me your name," she said. "Haern Gemcroft, 3rd cousin by marriage. And Zusa is? Haern rubbed his temples. My wife, Zusa Gemcroft, originally of the Gandrum family line, having fallen for me at a ball celebrating Nathaniel's safe return. Apparently I was a skillful dancer. And why are you here? Haern muttered through his answer, wondering for the 100th time why he'd agreed to go. As nice as it felt to get away from the dark streets of Veldaren, he was completely out of his element amid the wealth and traditions of the Trifect. It's our honeymoon, he said. You agreed to take us so we might see the port and buy presents from afar. Elisa sat down beside the fire, accepting a bowl of soup, and frowned at him as she sipped. I hope you can put on a better act when we're inside the city. Haern accepted his own food and ate. Elisa finished, and while Haern took seconds, she went off to their wagon to see how Zusa fared. She, too, had been unhappy with Elisa's scheme to get them into the city unnoticed. But Haern could not deny the usefulness of the ploy. Wherever Elisa went, they could follow. Yet at the same time they had a ready-made excuse for when they needed to search the city unnoticed. Of course, come nightfall, the real work would begin, and he could don his cloaks while Zusa covered herself with her wrappings. Elisa stepped back into the light of the fire, Zusa trailing behind her. Haern nearly choked on a piece of potato. The slender woman wore a loose dress with a wide V-cut between her breasts that ran all the way to the belt at her navel. Her skirt was long and violet, swaying about her legs. Apparently lacking Haern's discomfort, Zusa twirled once, then curtsied as if she'd been raised in court her whole life. It's a bit revealing, Haern said, immediately realizing that was far from the compliment he meant to offer. Elisa looked ready to murder him. It's the style there, brought over from Kerr by their sailors. Be glad I dressed you in Veldaren fashion. You'd have half your body exposed otherwise. Haern scratched at his neck. Would it be less poofy? More and more I doubt the wisdom of your assistance, Zusa said. She ran her hands through her short hair. At least you are handsome. No one would believe me marrying you otherwise. No one's going to believe it anyway, Haern said. I've still got scars from when you tried to kill me. You tried to kill Elisa first, remember? Such doe-eyed lovers, Elisa said, sounding like a tired mother. I swear, sometimes I wonder why I brought either of you. Haern laughed. He'd feared awkwardness, given her station and his history, but she seemed sincere about her gratitude for what he'd done for her son Nathaniel. Currently, he was up in the north under Lord Gandrum's protection. Haern almost wished the boy had come. It would have been nice to have a familiar face around, even if Nathaniel had not been conscious when he carried him to safety after an attack by an ambitious lover of Elisa's. Zusa left to change into clothes more suitable for sleeping. While she was gone, the servant returned from the city. At his sour expression, Elisa urged him to speak. The servant glanced once at Haern, then said, Lord Keenan has cremated both Terrace and Julie and delayed the burial for your arrival. He is thankful for your appearance and looks forward to your company. As for the city, the business with the elves has grown significantly worse. Not long ago, a cloaked man killed the previous elven ambassador and wounded those with him. Haern straightened, and he exchanged a look with Elisa. This man, she said, do they know who he is? Did he leave a symbol or name of some kind? While the two survivors watched, he caught an eye into the ambassador's chest. He calls himself the Wraith. That is all anyone would tell me, though I would not be surprised if Lord Keenan knows more. Haern swallowed, his mouth dry. Elisa dismissed the servant, and when Zusa returned in a simple robe, they informed her of what they'd heard. First the Trifect, now the elves? Haern said, his voice low as he stared into the fire. What does he want with me? Have you ever heard that name before? This Wraith? Haern glanced at Zusa, then shook his head. No. I'll need to speak with the elves who survived, learn anything I can of him. Another servant arrived, carrying a small cask of wine and a trio of cups. They all accepted, and then Elisa led their toast. "To a long life," she said, "something I feel none of us shall have." Haern clinked his glass against hers. "A wonderful toast," he said, trying to imitate Elisa's noble attitude while bowing low. "Glory will never, ever believe you are a member of my family," Elisa said, sipping from her glass. "Let's pray he's more understanding when he realizes you're there to keep me alive and find his son's killer." Elisa downed the rest. "That too. Good night, Haern. Tomorrow morning we ride into the city. Try to sleep well. It will be a long day." She left Haern alone with Zusa. He shifted uncomfortably beside the fire. Zusa always made him feel awkward. He was never sure of what she thought or might say. She often stared at him and was never self-conscious enough to hide it. "Do you know where we might start looking?" he asked, breaking the silence. "We start with the Keenan mansion," she said. "From there, the elves. After that, we listen for rumors and search for others he might have killed. I found you, Watcher. We can find this pale imitator." That servant said something about the business with the elves having grown worse. What did he mean by that? Zusa glanced to the city. "I don't know much, but what little I do know is grim. Disputes over territory, particularly the Quellan Forest, have put the elves and the people of Angelport at the very precipice of war. Tomorrow, we ride into a pile of kindling and oil. The slightest spark will set it off." Haern chuckled, earning himself a raised eyebrow. "Nothing," he said. "I just have a feeling, given how my life has gone, that we're about to be that spark." Zusa lifted her glass, and finally she smiled. "To starting fires," she said. Haern smiled in return. "To starting fires." Chapter 3. Ulrich Blackwater stepped onto the deck of the Fireheart and scowled. "Where's Pyle?" he asked two nearby crewmen, bare-chested lads soaked with sweat as they labored crate after crate toward the plank leading to the dock. "The captain's in his cabin, my lord," said one, bowing low. "Busy." Ulrich weaved through the various ropes, cargo, and men until he reached the captain's quarters. Without knocking, he yanked the door open and stepped inside. Despite the overall size of the Fireheart, the quarters were cramped. Just a bed, a desk, and a few maps tacked to a wall. On that bed, with a naked whore riding atop him, lay Captain Darrell Pyle. Seeing his entrance, Darrell laid his head back and sighed. "Didn't I tell you I was busy?" he asked. "Perhaps." Ulrich glared at the woman, who slipped to the side and grabbed her clothes. "Leave us." "Don't go far, girl," Darrell said as the whore hurried half-naked past Ulrich and out the door. With only a blanket keeping him decent, Darrell leaned against the bedpost and scratched his neck. He was a burly man, with skin darkened from months spent in the sun. A long scar ran from his lip to his chin, leaving a gap in his brown beard. "Shouldn't you be helping them unload?" Ulrich asked. "My men know what they're doing. It's not your men I'm worried about. It's my cargo." Darrell stepped off the bed and pulled on his trousers. "Your damn wine is safe and dry," he said, buttoning them. "Not that I give two shits. I could piss in every bottle, and still the scum here in Angelport would consider it fine vintage. I would still prefer it if you oversaw things, in case such a respectable crew as yours decides to help themselves. You telling me how to run my ship?" "My ship," Ulrich said, glaring. "You may captain it, But this is my boat, my cargo, and my reputation on the line. Besides, I don't give a damn about the wine. You'll be carrying something worth 1,000 times more soon, and I need to be certain it is kept safe and untouched." The captain pulled a white shirt over his head. It was hopelessly stained with sweat. "What could you possibly have that's worth more?" he asked. In answer, Ulrich took out a small pouch from his pocket and opened the drawstrings. From within, he drew a single leaf, tore off a small piece, and handed it over. It was green with strange purple veins, and Darrell grunted as he examined it. "What is this?" he asked. "Bite, but don't chew. Keep it crushed between your teeth and focus on breathing steady. Oh, and I suggest you sit down first." Darrell shrugged. No stranger to various drugs and drinks, he seemed unimpressed with the simple leaf. Ignoring Ulrich's advice, he popped the leaf into his mouth and chewed. Within seconds, his expression changed and his chewing slowed. Ulrich watched as Darrell's pupils dilated and his hands started to twitch. Taking a seat at the captain's desk, he patiently waited for the drug's effects to pass so he could continue their conversation. After about 5 minutes, Darrell's legs wobbled and he fell hard onto his elbow. Even though the jolt caused him to bite his tongue, he barely reacted. Blood dribbled down his chin and into his beard. "Unbelievable," Darrell said, his voice strangely dreamlike. Ulrich found the captain's private stash of alcohol and poured himself a drink. Behind him, the captain remained oddly quiet, other than for the occasional grunt of pleasure. After Ulrich had finished his third drink, Darrell finally came around. "How long?" he asked, spitting blood to the floor. "About 15 minutes, Ulrich said. "Damn, that was better than fucking." His eyes were bloodshot, and he stared at the pocket where the rest of the leaf remained in its pouch. "That was just a piece," Ulrich said, holding in his grin. "Imagine a whole leaf. You'd be out for hours. If I could just have—" "No," Ulrich said, standing. "No more. Not while you are captain of my ship. In a day or two it'll be gone from your blood and you'll be able to control your desire for it. But while you sail for me, I can't risk it. I'm sure you understand." For a moment, Darrell looked ready to strike him, then regained his composure. "Gods damn it," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Give me that bottle." "It has several names, but the one most used is Violet," said Ulrich as the captain downed half the bottle in a series of gulps. "Never felt so good in my life," he said, wiping his chin. He looked down at his pants, realizing they were stained with semen. Instead of being embarrassed, he laughed. "We have only a little, but I anticipate more soon." Ulrich tossed the captain a rag. "We've known of its properties for a few years now, but it was passed among the lords, always expensive, always rare. But things are changing, Darrell. Soon we'll have a nice, steady supply of violet to spread throughout the world. Clean yourself up and get the rest of the crates unloaded. Whatever untrustworthy crewmen you have, get rid of them. When the first shipment of violet sails north, nothing, and I mean nothing, must go wrong. For now, I'll be loading a single crate into your hold, for safekeeping only. You are not to open it, let alone take a leaf. Understand?" Darrell stared off for a moment as if still longing for the leaf, then shook his head to clear it. "You'll make a fortune with that," he said. "Give me even a few samples, and I could get everyone west of the rivers hooked." He sniffed his fingers. "This stuff even legal?" "For now, and I've taken steps to keep it that way. Good day, Captain. I have matters I must attend. Stay in port and wait for my orders. It may be a few weeks, but I'm sure you will find a way to pass the time. Make sure the crate is kept carefully guarded." He turned for the door, then stopped. It was ajar, but only slightly. He was certain he'd closed it. "Such interesting pleasures," said a man perched atop Darrell's bed, his legs crossed beneath him. Both whirled, and Ulrich drew his dagger. Wrapped in cloaks and black leather sat someone Ulrich had thought only existed in rumors and stories. His face was hidden by heavy shadows cast by his hood, but his grin remained perfectly visible. "The Wraith," Ulrich said. "That's who you are, isn't it?" "Such brilliant wisdom," said the intruder, "though perhaps I give you too much praise. You would have noticed me 10 minutes ago if you were truly clever." "What in blazes are you doing on my ship?" Darrell asked. He took a step back to where his sword hung on the wall. The Wraith tisked at him, and he put a hand on the hilt of his blade. "Stay still, sea vermin. I have no reason to kill you, but I will if you do something so irrevocably stupid. I come bearing gifts for our dear merchant lord." Ulrich stood straighter, and he tried to put on an air of superiority. "So be it, stranger. I will accept your gift, if it is worthwhile, but then I must demand you leave the Fire Heart at once." "Demand?" said the Wraith, his grin growing. "You amuse me." He tossed Ulrich a heavy bag that had been hidden behind his back. It thudded to the floor. Slowly Ulrich bent down, opening the top to look inside. His throat tightened, and he stepped away. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked. "I told you. A gift." Ulrich kicked it to Darrell, who opened it without hesitation. Pulling it out by the hair, the captain held a severed head, all the blood drained so that it did not drip across the cabin. The face was familiar, despite its pale color and obvious mutilation. "Who?" Ulrich asked, trying to swallow down the lump in his throat. "Must I do everything?" The Wraith stepped off the bed, the movement startling both of them. Ulrich felt certain the man would draw his sword, but he kept it sheathed. For now. Once again Ulrich looked at the severed head, trying to make out the face. The bulbous nose, the slender chin. Familiar? When it hit, he put his back to the wall and held out his dagger. "An attack on one of us is an attack on us all," he said, wishing he sounded braver than the panicked whine that came from his lips. "Please," the Wraith said, offering him an elegant bow. "I look forward to your retaliation." He kicked open the door and sprinted across the deck, leaving their line of sight before either could react. The moment he was gone, Darrell tossed the head back into the bag. "What the fuck was that?" asked the captain. "I don't know," Ulrich said, feeling his legs go weak. "But you're holding the head of William Amour." The two exchanged a look. William Amour, one of the 6 merchant lords of Angelport, of which Ulrich was also a member. "Shove a rock in its mouth and toss it overboard," Ulrich said. "I will accept no blame for this." "Will do." Still trying to regain his composure, Ulrich exited the cabin. Much of the cargo was unloaded, and his own people scurried about the dock, directing the crates to various stores, merchants, and warehouses. If any had noticed the Wraith and his strange garb, none showed it. He spoke with a few to calm himself down more than anything else, then hurried north. With the sea vanishing behind him, along with its salty smell and vulgar cries of sailors, Ulrich felt much better. As he walked, he checked to make sure nothing untoward stained his fine clothing. He would be arriving late to the funeral, but so long as he looked dashing, he wouldn't mind. Normally, Ulrich traveled without guards, but the incident with the Wraith had him rethinking that policy. Still, the streets were generally regarded as safe, so long as you were of high enough station that the city guards left you alone. At various gateways between walls, soldiers made sure the riffraff stayed in their appropriate place. In the outer ring, Ulrich curled south to meet his brother in the Keenan mansion. At their gate, He was searched well, which would have insulted him if he hadn't known of the attack weeks prior. Doing everything he could to push the wraith and that severed head from his mind, he joined the service held within. About 50 people mingled throughout the first few rooms of the mansion, drinking wine and conversing in soft tones. Many candles hung from the ceiling, but only a third were lit, keeping the mood of the place somber. The walls were elegantly painted into a representation of stone, the carpet a deep blue, which seemed to grotesquely resemble blood in the dim orange light. Before anyone noticed his arrival, Ulrich spotted his brother Stern alone in a corner and joined him. "I assume I haven't missed the burial," he said, motioning over a servant so he might have a drink. He knew he was pushing it given how much he'd downed in Daryl's cabin, but he needed all the help he could get to remain calm. "Lady Gemcroft just arrived," said Stern. "It'll be a while before the pointless introductions are finished and we can begin. At least the Conningtons are still bickering about who will be ruling what. There's a few minor members from their household here, but no one powerful enough we have to kiss their ass. And no one as fat and disgusting as that fat bastard Leon was." Stern looked him up and down, then frowned. "Are you all right?" The two were not twins, but they looked enough alike that most people thought they were. They had the same blonde hair, pale skin, and brown eyes. Stern was older, though, and taller by an inch. That was often the only difference. They'd gotten along well enough that when their father died, the two had amicably split the inherited wealth, vaulting the both of them into powerful positions among the merchant lords. With how similar they were and how alike their minds worked, Ulrich was not surprised that Stern could sense his unease. "Do not worry about me," he said. "I'm here for you, after all. To lose Julie like that—" Stern finished his glass, then set it down hard on a nearby shelf. "It's the damn trifect," he said. "They're no better than the thieves they warred with for years, and my daughter had to get into the middle of it. Madeline won't even let me hold my own granddaughter. You know that? As if I am the dangerous one. No, Julie shouldn't have married Taras, married into that privileged, murderous circle of—" "Enough," Ulrich said, glancing about to make sure no one heard. "You know why we let her? What we all stood to gain. Their marriage was to help create peace. Don't ruin that now by ranting like a drunken idiot at their funeral." Stern took a deep breath and nodded. "Forgive me," he said, tears breaking through his steely facade. "I have not slept well in weeks. She was everything to me, Ulrich. Now she's gone, and why? The whim of a madman? What could he want?" Ulrich thought of the meeting with the wraith on the Fireheart and decided now was not the time to discuss it. "Go wash your face," he said, squeezing his brother's shoulder. "I'll mingle fine on my own while you compose yourself." Stern thanked him and left. After refilling his drink, Ulrich wandered through the mansion, paying more attention to the art than the people. The three families of the trifect might be arrogant, overconfident, and wasteful, but they had good taste in paintings. While admiring a portrait of a paladin, the right half of the canvas purposely charred and burned, he heard someone clear their throat behind him. "Glad for you to be here, albeit late," said the soft-spoken Laurie, offering his hand as Ulrich turned around. Ulrich shook it while looking over the grieving father. His dark skin looked pale, and he'd cut his long ponytail as a sign of mourning. Ulrich tried to hide his annoyance that the ever-perceptive Laurie had realized he'd arrived late. Some might consider that an insult, and he did his best to apologize. "Pressing matters delayed me," he said. "I fear someone lost their head over them." Laurie winced, and Ulrich had to bite his tongue to keep from chuckling. He'd forgotten the most prevalent rumor was that Taras had been found decapitated with his wife's head lying in his lap. Ulrich had doubted the truth of it, but Laurie's reaction made him wonder. Well, that and his little present in the bag earlier on the Fireheart. "I hope business continues well for you," Laurie said, pushing the conversation to safer topics. "Better than ever. There's an opportunity we've discovered that should bring our wealth right up with yours, Laurie. I wonder, do you think there's any more room in the trifect for a promising merchant like myself?" Laurie's smile was so patronizing, Ulrich once more bit his tongue. "In hundreds of years, we've never had more than our 3 families," said Laurie. "If you truly desire it, though, we can arrange a marriage, perhaps with one of Jack Connington's nieces." Ulrich snorted. Some niece? He wanted his family brought into the trifect, not pushed aside to be married to some far-distant relative's brat. "Sorry," he said, interrupting Laurie. "I don't much care for arranged marriages. They rarely turn out well." The barb hit like he'd hoped, and Laurie's anger shook through his carefully controlled performance. "Pardon me," he said. "I should speak with the priest before he begins the services." With him gone, Ulrich wandered further, seeing few familiar faces. It was only because of his brother that he was there at all. The trifect kept to itself, except when it came time to collect its debts. A lovely lady caught his eye, distracting him from the paintings. She wore a revealing violet dress, and unlike most women of Angelport, she kept her hair cut short at the neck. Running a hand through his hair to make sure it was smooth, he joined her side. "Would you like a drink?" he asked, seeing her hands empty. "Are you a servant?" Her voice was husky, deep. Her exoticness elevated her beauty in his eyes. "Of course not," he said, laughing as if amused by the error. "I am Ulrich Blackwater, merchant and proprietor of many wondrous items from all across Desrel. I merely ask because you seemed alone, and I would hate for your shyness to keep you from enjoying yourself." "Not alone," she said. "I am merely watching." She nodded toward an elegantly dressed woman across the hall. Ulrich tried to see if he recognized her, but did not. One of the lesser ladies of Angelport, perhaps, or from nearby Omn? "I have given you my name, but have not had the pleasure of yours," he said, bringing his attention back to her. "Zusa Gemcroft," she said, still cool toward him. Ulrich took another drink, not yet frustrated. Something was clearly off with this woman, which made her all the more interesting. "Gemcroft," he said, feigning surprise. "Are you with Elisa, then?" "I am." That explained the other woman across the hall surrounded by guests. No doubt they were all busy kissing Elisa's ass. "I know a little of the Gemcroft family, but must confess I have never heard your name mentioned before." She blushed a little, then pointed to one of the men near Elisa, though who exactly Ulrich could not tell. "I am newly married into the family." Ulrich's smile widened. He loved seducing newlywed women. So nervous, so excited, and always a challenge. That, and it forever gave him power of blackmail if successful. "I am truly envious of whoever the lucky—" "Excuse me," interrupted one of the servants, immediately bowing in apology. "The service is about to begin. If you would, please follow me to the gardens." Zusa shot Ulrich a smile he could not decipher. "I will see you another time," she said, curtsying once before returning to Elisa's side. Ulrich watched the sway of her hips as she went, then glared at the servant. "I know where the gardens are," he said. "I'll be there shortly." "Of course," the servant said, bowing again. Ulrich had no intention of going, having little interest in the prattle of priests and crying of women. He wandered deeper into the mansion, hoping for some solitude. Once everyone was dismissed, he'd slip back among them, say his goodbyes, and hurry off to more pressing matters. The Amour family, for example, needed a new head appointed after the loss of the last one. He chuckled at the grim pun. Perhaps he shouldn't have tossed it overboard. It might have been amusing to present it to William's wife. He'd always hated that hag. Turning a corner, he was surprised to find he was not alone. A blond man stood in the doorway of a nearby room, staring. Ulrich vaguely recognized him, then remembered he'd been at Elisa's side. He looked too nicely dressed to be a servant. Distant cousin, maybe? "Lost?" he asked, deciding it best to make the other man explain his reasons for being there so he might not ask the same of him. "Only looking." He gestured to the room. Was this where it all happened? Ulrich looked inside, realizing they were at Terrace's bedroom. "I believe so. What brings you here? Morbid curiosity?" "Something like that." Ulrich offered his hand. No doubt the stranger wished to avoid the service as much as he did. Already he liked him. "Ulrich Blackwater," he said. "Haern." "Gemcroft." Ulrich lifted his eyebrows. Were the Gemcrofts suddenly mating like rabbits? Here was yet another he'd never heard of. "Well, Haern, what brings you to Angelport?" He hesitated a moment, then looked back to the room. "It is my honeymoon." "Is it now? Well, a funeral is hardly the place to be. Or were you scouting for available bedrooms? I doubt this one will be used for a while." He laughed, then had a thought. "Say, you aren't married to a lady named Zusa, are you?" Haern's pause was enough. Ulrich smacked him on the shoulder and was surprised by how firm his footing was. Almost felt like hitting a rock. "You lucky bastard! Wouldn't blame you for fucking on a dead man's bed when the woman is dead fine." Haern looked too embarrassed to respond, which amused Ulrich all the more. He was a handsome man, and with startling blue eyes. Seducing Zusa away from him for a tryst would be that much more of a challenge. As much as he liked the man, he might have to use a bit of poison to ensure Zusa was his at least once before they left for Veldaren. "Do you know what happened here?" Haern asked, stepping into the bedroom. Ulrich followed, also curious to see. "Only rumors. You'd think 100 men hacked them all to death if you believed the rabble. I think it was just one man, though, a fool the commoners have begun calling the Wraith. He slaughtered guards left and right, butchered Terrace and Julie, and then vanished in a puff of smoke." "Smoke?" Haern whispered. "I see." The room had a clean yet barren feel to it. The sheets had been stripped from the bed and not replaced. The carpet was so immaculate it had to be new. The windows appeared new as well. Even the walls glistened with fresh paint, the room still stinking from the application. Haern looked about, then pointed upward. "Damn," Ulrich said, finally spotting it. They'd changed the sheets, the floors, and the walls, but had missed a faint spray of blood across the ceiling. "This was no assassination," Haern said, his voice soft. "I doubt he cared one way or the other about the couple. This was a message, and he made sure it carried far." Something about the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, gave Ulrich a sense of unease. For the first time he realized the man had a pair of sabers sheathed at his belt. "Consider me curious. What makes you think someone would cut off a person's head, rip his entrails from his stomach, and fling his blood about like an insane painter, yet not care one way or the other about him?" Haern walked over to the window, testing its lock. "He let the baby live. I saw Madeline holding her." Ulrich's eyes narrowed at such perception. "What is your relation to Elisa again?" Haern looked back. "Second cousin." "Who is your father?" "Is this a test?" Ulrich slowly reached for his dagger. "That's a poor answer." Haern turned where he stood, and something odd came over him. His face darkened, and a hard edge entered those blue eyes. His stance shifted slightly, the muscles in his body relaxed, yet at the ready. While still at his sides, his hands brushed the hilts of his sabers, clearly ready to draw. "I am a guest in the Keenan family's mansion," Haern said. "I was not aware I had to explain myself to you." Ulrich suddenly felt nervous, his every action scrutinized with deadly intensity. With a startling clarity, he realized he felt the same as he did when in the presence of the Wraith. "Forgive me for any insult," Ulrich said, letting go of his dagger. "After what happened, we're all a little nervous of assassins." Haern's eyes seemed to sparkle at that. "I'm not one to live in fear of assassins." "I can imagine." Haern left the room, passing a mere foot in front of Ulrich. For the briefest moment he thought to draw his dagger and stab him in the back, but he let the impulse pass. Such a confident display was not made carelessly. This Haern had looked him over, then dismissed him as being no threat. The thought burned like fire in his gut. Smoothing out his shirt, he returned to the main parlor of the mansion to await his brother, enduring the many insulting glares he received from the serving staff. After what felt like forever, the first of many guests returned. Ulrich remained seated, standing only when Stern finally showed. The wait had left him irritated, eager to deal with the business at hand instead of more false sympathy and tears. "Something wrong?" Stern asked, seeing his brother's obvious displeasure. "We need to go," Ulrich said. "Been delaying long enough as is." "Delaying what?" "The inevitable. Not too long ago, William Amour's head was cut from his shoulders and tossed into the ocean." Stern looked like he'd been slapped, and a bit of anger cut through his grief. "Who would dare do such a—" He stopped, and then shook his head, having read Ulrich all too well. "Him, isn't it? That Wraith? What have we done to earn his wrath?" "Lower your voice," Ulrich said, grabbing his brother by the arm and leading him to the exit. "And I don't know. Call a meeting of the merchant lords and set it for tomorrow. We'll let the Amours have a day to prepare their funeral and appoint one of William's sons in charge." "And what is it you hurry off to do?" "None of your concern." The Keenans were waiting by the door, with Madeline holding the newborn child just as Haern had said. The two brothers said their goodbyes, then left. They split, each heading for their homes. Trusting Stern to spread the word, assuming the other merchant lords didn't know already, Ulrich traveled through his spacious but empty home to his private room. No kids, no wife, no family. Just as Ulrich preferred. After he'd stripped himself of his uncomfortable clothes and locked the door, he pulled out the pouch from his discarded shirt. But first he covered up the large glass window. Sunlight always hurt his eyes afterward. Tossing an entire leaf into his mouth, he bit down and then breathed deep. As his head grew light and his blood pounded through his veins, he thought of what Zusa might look like naked. Amid the euphoria, he felt a certainty overcome him, one that lasted throughout the next 2 hours. No matter the cost, he would have her, and he'd make damn sure that arrogant prick Haern knew it. But mostly he thought of Zusa, of taking her against her will, until at last the violet faded and he fell asleep with his seed spilled across his hand. Chapter 4. Elisa played the kind supporter as the proceedings ended, and the guests trickled out one by one. She endured 100 greetings, treating them all as if they were with a long-lost friend. "Will you be all right?" Zusa asked her when she closed her eyes and rubbed her forehead. "I'm fine," she said. "It's just, all this makes me miss Nathaniel for some reason. We wallow in the sorrow of others. Of course you'd fear for your own loved ones." "Doesn't mean I like it, nor wish to think of it." "Then drink," Zusa said, handing her a glass. "Wine is excellent for forgetting." Elisa chuckled. "At least there is that," she said, hoping the burn of it going down her throat would banish her tiredness. As she did, one of Laurie's servants came to inform her that her room was prepared. "What of Zusa and Haern?" she asked. "They have a room of their own, though it is near the back with the servants. I hope there is no offense." "That will be fine," Zusa said. "I only hope we do not keep the servants awake at night." The servant, a young, clean-shaven man, blushed and hurried away without a word. "This is amusing," Zusa said, glancing at her own cleavage. I should show my body more often. It makes the men so much more pliable and stupid. Body like yours? Surprised you weren't showing skin the moment your breasts budded, Elisa said. She winced. I'm sorry, Zusa, I forgot. When Elisa had first met Zusa, she had been a member of the Faceless Women, a sect created in punishment for priestesses of Karak who broke their rules of sexuality. They'd kept her body covered in tight wraps, her face hidden behind a thin cloth. Zusa still wore the wrappings, though for what reason Elisa could only begin to guess. At least she no longer hid her face, except when absolutely necessary. I will blame the wine, and not you, Zusa said. Elisa felt her head swimming and set aside the glass. Enough with that. She rarely succumbed to weaknesses, and she would not drown herself in alcohol just because she was a lovesick mother. Glancing about to make sure no one might overhear, she leaned closer to Zusa and began to whisper. What will you and Haern do first? We'll go to the streets, she said. Every city is alive with its own crude personality. We must learn of Angelport, and from there, learn of every hole someone might hide in. Good luck. Just make sure you two are back before morning. No one will be surprised if you sleep in. Zusa bowed, then left to find Haern. Elisa felt unsteady on her feet, so she found herself a place to sit in front of a fireplace. The chair was overstuffed and a dreary red, but she sank into it quite comfortably. Elisa let out a sigh. She couldn't remember when she'd last eaten. Stupid of her to drink on an empty stomach. Are you feeling ill? She looked up to see Madeline taking a seat across from her. She shifted baby Tori from her left arm to her right, stroking her face with her fingers. Tori was awake, but only barely, her eyes slowly opening and closing as she snuggled. The journey here was long, Elisa said. I think it's worn me out more than I expected. It is a trip I've taken for every Kensgold. I'm well aware of its toll. You could move back to Veldaren. Madeline shook her head. She had always been incredibly beautiful, increasingly so over the years, and seeing her holding a newborn made her all the more stunning. But when she looked up and spoke the name Veldaren, she looked shockingly ugly. Veldaren? No, girl, I will not move back to that terrible place. You may choose to bed with thieves, but I will not. There is no safety there. Nor here, Elisa said, knowing she was crossing a line but not caring. Madeline clutched the babe tightly to her chest, hard enough to make little Tori cry. The mongrel you dealt with, that killer, the King's Watcher? By his blade you pour wealth into the streets, and for what? It was his sigil left written in my son's blood. Veldaren was your mess, and you helped create him. Far as I'm concerned, your hands are just as guilty. Enough, woman, Laurie said, stepping between them. Neither had heard his approach, so focused were they on each other. He glared at his wife, then bowed low to Elisa. Forgive her. She speaks out of grief. As do I. Elisa lied. Tori should feed before she sleeps, Madeline said, standing. Excuse me while I fetch the nursemaid. Laurie grabbed his wife's arm. Her eyes flared, and Elisa felt she looked upon a wild animal, not a noblewoman. Madeline stood there, staring, until at last he let her go without saying a word. He didn't seem offended, only sighed and took her seat across from Elisa by the fire. She has not taken this well, Laurie said, sounding tired beyond his years. Sometimes I think that baby is the only reason she continues on at all. Forgive me, Laurie. I did not mean to provoke her. I only suggested she return to Veldaren. It might do her good to be out of this house and its memories. I have expressed the same, Laurie said, leaning back. He snapped his fingers, and a servant rushed over with a drink in hand. Downing its contents in rapid gulps, he had it refilled, then waved the man away. But she will not heed my words. To her, Veldaren will always be the place she was taken hostage by Thren during the Bloody Kensgold, and as long as that spider's alive, she'll never return. Laurie, I meant to mention this earlier. My guests. This about your... what were they, cousins? Laurie laughed. I've spent every waking moment of my life surrounded by men and women who dine with golden spoons. It doesn't take much to know neither has had the Gemcroft name for long, if ever. Who are they really? Bodyguards? Elisa bit her lip, trying to think of the proper answer. In a way, she said. Laurie shifted in his chair, his hand drifting to his neck before returning to the armrest. No doubt he missed the long braid that used to fall over his shoulder. Touching it with his fingers had been a nervous tic of his, and now it was gone. I understand you wishing for extra safety, given what happened. I trust they will be with you at all times. Not exactly. Wishing for her own drink, Elisa swallowed and pressed on. Laurie was much older than her, and with Leon's death 2 years ago, he had become the eldest ruler of the Trifect. She'd always felt intimidated in his presence, however soft-spoken he might be. Something about him always seemed vulnerable, and made her want to trust him. But she could never forget the ruthless stories she'd heard growing up, of what he'd done to make the thief guilds truly fear him. Still, she did not want to lie to her host, especially when he was her ally and friend. I have brought Haern and Zusa with me so they might hunt down the one who killed Julie and Taris, this man you call the Wraith. Laurie set down his glass hard enough to chip aside. For a long moment he sat there, leaning forward in his chair, thinking. Elisa did her best not to appear nervous or uncertain. At last, he looked up at her, tired eyes bloodshot and a frown on his lips. The past few weeks have passed in agony, he said. Each moment crawls like a day. I could tell you down to the hour how long it has been since my son left this world. And I assure you, for every one of those torturous seconds, I have had my men scouring Angel Port in search of him. We have found nothing, heard nothing, other than more names claimed as his victims. It doesn't matter who you brought. It doesn't matter how much you paid them, or how good you think they are. They won't find him. If this is the gift you've come to offer me, then you waste your time. He stood to leave, but Elisa stopped him with a sentence. I brought the Watcher with me. He turned, something dangerous stirring in his eyes. Who, Elisa? The King's Watcher, she said, refusing to back down. The man I brought. That's who he really is. You brought him? Asked Laurie, his voice strained, hands clenched into fists. Into my home? Beyond my walls? It was his mark left to me in mockery, and you bring him here? It was not him, she insisted. I am certain of it. The travel between our cities is too great, Laurie, and the Watcher was spotted dozens of times in the weeks prior to your son's death. Whoever this wraith is, he chose that symbol for a reason. It's a challenge, Laurie, a challenge to the Watcher, and I could think of no one better to hunt him down and lay his body at your feet. You bring a murderer to find another murderer. He shook his head. You've always been willing to lower yourself into dealing with scum to solve your problems. One of these days, Elisa, you'll learn that if you lie with enough dogs, you'll catch their fleas. I do what I must, she said, straightening in her seat. I will bear no shame in that. Laurie chuckled, and it seemed all his fearful intensity bled away, and he relaxed back into his seat. Once more, he became the charming man he so often was. If you insist, then let us see how your Watcher fellow fares here in our city. I'll tell Torgar to let him come and go as he pleases, within reason, of course. And I suggest not telling Madeline that the Watcher sleeps under her roof. The results would not be, pleasant. He smiled, and Elisa could not help but smile back. Despite the redness of his eyes, he finally seemed to show a trace of his old self. The man he'd been before his son was brutally murdered in his room. "Pleasant night, Lady Gemcroft," he said, bowing. "And pleasant dreams." Left alone, Elisa finally relaxed, glad to have that confrontation over with. His certainty about the wraith's elusiveness worried her a little, but she brushed that aside. There were plenty that the Trifect had tried to track down, yet failed. Thren Fellhorn was a prime example of that, eluding capture for more than a decade. Yet she had the Watcher at her disposal, the one who had found those she could not, frightened those who felt no fear, and forced an entire war to end with just his bloody sabers. If there was anyone who could find this wraith, it was him. "We're never going to find this guy," Haern said as he tightened his hood. "A skilled assassin in his hometown. One daring enough to strike at a member of the Trifect? He'll know every nook and cranny to hide in, nooks and crannies we know nothing about." "You whine like a child," Zusa said, looping her dark purple wrappings about her neck. She'd been half naked when he entered their room, so he dressed with his back to her as she slowly covered her body. "That must take forever to put on," he said after stealing a glance to make sure she was decent. "It was part of our punishment," Zusa said, grabbing another roll of cloth and pressing it against her chin. "The idea was that with how much time it would take, we would be more able to resist our womanly urges." "It work?" The wrappings covered her face, cheekbones, and forehead with only a long gap across her eyes. "There are many ways to find pleasure, even fully clothed. Trust me, we faceless women discovered them all." Haern felt himself blushing and quickly changed the topic. "Where is it we should go first?" he asked. "The docks." "Any particular reason?" Zusa smiled at him. Her lips might have been covered, but he could tell by the way her eyes sparkled. "I will explain when we arrive. Now let us hurry. Elisa said we would be allowed to come and go as we please, but I still think it best we not let many know of our presence here." Haern inched open the door and looked out. The hallway was dark and empty. The entire mansion had been laid down for rest, the sun long set. Nodding to Zusa, he pulled his cloaks tight about him and led the way. They kept to the servants' side, since they were closer to their exit. When they were to leave, a burly man stood on the opposite side of the door, his arms crossed. A wicked scar ran across the bridge of his nose. He was past his prime years, but still looked like he could tear Haern in half with his bare hands. "You're blocking the way," Haern said, keeping his tone flat as he came to a stop before him. "Move? You're that Watcher guy, aren't you? Laurie said you'd be coming and to let you do as you want." "Who kind of him?" "Care to do as he says?" Instead, the man drew an enormous sword off his back. It had to weigh a ton, but he handled it with ease. "They tell me you weren't the one who killed Taris," he said, "but I saw the symbol. You might not have done it yourself, but that don't mean you're innocent. I fought that wraith bastard. If the rumors about you are even half true, this guy's still better." "We don't have time for this," Zusa whispered behind him. The man let out a roar, as if he were trying to intimidate them. Haern winced, but only from the heavy stench of alcohol that assaulted his nostrils. "Who are you?" Haern asked. "Torgar. I'm in charge of Laurie's mercenaries, as well as keeping the family safe. If it were up to me, I'd have you hanging outside the—" He suddenly tensed, and his jaw dropped a little. Zusa stood before him, her knee rammed into his crotch, her left hand holding his neck to keep him steady. Her dagger pressed against his abdomen, just below his leather armor. "Move," she breathed into his ear, just before kicking the side of his head. Torgar dropped to his rear, and he howled out his anger. "You bitch!" Zusa blew him a kiss as she ran on. Haern followed, offering the mercenary a sympathetic shrug. "A little harsh," he said as they vaulted the walls of the Keenan estate. "The oaf thinks with pride and alcohol. I have no patience with either." "I'll keep that in mind." They kept to the shadows as they hurried down the street toward a main intersection leading to the docks. Their first obstacle was one of the 3 walls that divided the city. its gateways well lit and carefully guarded. They slunk to the side of a home and peered around. "Doubt they'll let us through," Haern said. "Not armed and dressed like this." "We could take them out. Not fatally. Don't give me that look." Haern glanced at the wall. It wasn't that tall, and with so many homes built up against it, just maybe. "Follow me," Zusa said, interrupting his thoughts. She ran until out of sight of the gate, then turned and vaulted high into the air. Haern could hardly believe what he saw. She landed atop the roof without needing to grab hold or climb up. Without slowing, she took 2 more steps and jumped again, catching the top of the wall with her fingers. Climbing up, she then leaned back down and offered her hand. "Jump or climb," she said. He took his own running leap, caught the roof with a hand, and used it to pull himself up. As for the wall, he jumped toward it, kicked off with a foot to lift higher, and then caught her hand. With minimal effort, she pulled him up, and together they overlooked the docks. "You need to teach me how to do that," he said, shaking his head. "Run fast, then jump. I didn't think it was difficult." She pointed. "There." "What am I looking for?" "You'll know." Haern followed her finger, then saw a trio of men lurking in an alley. They certainly looked up to no good. Nearby torches burned, lighting up taverns that bustled with activity. "What is your plan?" he asked. "Assault random thugs and hope one of them knows the wraith?" Zusa let out a sigh. "Sometimes I wonder how you achieved as much as you have." "A lot of luck was involved." She drew her daggers, twirling them in her hands. "This wraith sent you a message for a reason. I say we send one in return. Let him know you're here in Angelport. Let him find you, instead of us finding him." A grin spread across Haern's face. At least in this, he felt right at home. "Those scoundrels," he said, gesturing to the men in the alley. "They're about to have a very bad night, aren't they?" Zusa shot him a wink. "Lead on, Watcher." Haern dropped from the wall onto a roof, rolled to the street, and shook off the jarring landing. With Zusa following, he weaved toward the taverns. He stayed close to the walls and peered around corners to ensure they never saw his approach. The 3 men were all heavily tattooed, but most striking was the sword blade tattoo across their right eyes, stretching from chin to forehead. "Do you know what it means?" Haern whispered. "I don't," said Zusa, shaking her head. Haern shrugged, then resolved to watch. The men kept their attention focused on the nearby taverns. They were waiting, and Haern was patient enough to find out just what for. He would not attack men just for standing in a dark alley, despite the short swords they carried. He needed intent. He needed proof. "They wait for a victim," Zusa said. "Perhaps we should give them one?" Haern shrugged. "Wait here." He looped around back so that the 3 would not see his approach. Pulling down his hood, he turned a corner, making it seem as if he'd just come from one of the taverns. Walking with an uneven gait, he purposefully stumbled closer to their alley while making sure his sabers remained hidden by his cloaks. The outfit would label him an outsider, and he hoped that would help convince the men to make their move. Crossing the alley, the 3 men stepped out, their short swords drawn. "Don't seem from around here," said the biggest of the 3. Haern turned his head aside, not wanting them to get a good look at his face. As they neared, he tugged his hood lower, as if he were scared. "Visiting a friend, that's all," he said, doing his best to sound afraid. "Then come over here and hand over what you got," said another, stepping quickly to cut off Haern's retreat. "You need to pay to stay safe in this town, stranger." "I don't got much to live on," said Haern. "I'm sure your friend will help you out." Haern laughed. "That she will." Zusa fell upon the one blocking his way, her daggers slicing across his neck before he even knew she was there. Haern spun, drawing his sabers. The other 2 men swore, unprepared for his vicious assault. Only one managed to defend himself, and Haern batted aside his weak parry with ease. He gutted the nearest, then kicked his head to knock him on his back to die. The other turned to run, but Haern was faster. His saber slashed heel and down he went. The man rolled, then stopped when he hit a wall. "You can't do this," he said, spinning over to face them. "You'll hang, the both of you." Haern pressed a bloody saber edge underneath the man's chin, lifting his gaze so they might stare eye to eye. "If you have any sense, you'll shut up now, before I slice out your tongue," he said, covering his face with shadows cast from the distant flickering torchlight. The man swallowed, then carefully nodded. "That's a smart man. Tell everyone you know, whether they'll believe you or not, that the King's Watcher has come to Angelport. Your time draws to an end. Every one of you thieves risks death when you enter the shadows. The shadows are where I live. Tell them." The tattooed man laughed, stopping only when Haern pressed the tip hard enough to draw blood. "Thieves? Are you fucking stupid?" "You can deliver my message, or I can write it with your blood across the wall behind you. Your choice." The man swallowed. "I'll do it," he said. "Just let me go." Haern pulled back the blade and gestured for him to leave. He did, limping away from the docks. Zusa joined his side, wiping her daggers clean on the dead man's shirt. "He is not to be trusted," she said. "Then what do you suggest?" She knelt before one of the bodies and dipped her fingers into the gaping wound across his stomach. Once coated with blood and gore, she walked to the wall and began to write. "I am here," it said, signed with the name Watcher. "Let there be no doubt," she said, smearing the rest into a vague circle about the message. Haern looked at the two dead men, feeling vague unease. Something about it all wasn't quite right. Perhaps he should have waited for them to attack first, to at least confirm their intentions had been fatal and not just for a bit of coin. That tattoo, surely it signified their guild affiliations. Valderin was not Angelport, but he had a hard time believing the cities would be so different. Still, something about the way the man had laughed in mocking when he called him a thief. "We're done for now," he said, sheathing his sabers. He glanced about, but no guards or drunken workers were near to see what they'd done. "We have only begun. Search if you must. After the trip here, I could use a good night's rest. We've delivered the message you asked. What else could you hope for?" Zusa gave him a disappointed look, and he tried not to let it get to him. "To deliver it, again and again." Haern thought of killing more, and it put a bad taste in his mouth. "This isn't my city," he said. "I've done enough." He left, and Zusa did not follow. Back at the Keenan mansion, he slipped into his room, stripped off his clothes, and climbed into bed. Several hours later, he heard the door open. Zusa slipped inside. He shifted over to let her share the bed, but she did not join him. Without a pillow or blanket, she slept on the floor, still in her wrappings stained with blood. Chapter 5. Ingram Murband, Lord of Angelport and ruler of the Remir, listened to the guard's report with a growing rage. "You're sure it isn't this Wraith character I've been hearing rumors of?" he asked. The captain of the guard shook his head. "Different weapon used to kill them, plus a different name. Only one person's lived to see him, but he also listed clothes that don't match what the mercenaries at Laurie Keenan's mansion saw." Ingram leaned back in his chair. They were in his modest throne room, for unlike most lords, he had no castle. The walls and water of the city were enough to keep him safe. His mansion was an impressive structure, however, with a surrounding wall built of stone imported all the way from Kerr. In its center was his throne room, with no other purpose than meetings with various minor lords and commoners pleading for their simple definitions of justice. The walls were dark stone, and barren of any decoration. Ingram thought it made him seem all the more confident by not covering the walls with beheaded animals and war trophies to exaggerate his prowess. "I won't put up with this," he said. "I want it dealt with, and harshly, "Whatever the reason he is here, we need the entire city turned against him before he sways any hearts." "What do you suggest?" asked the captain. "Take it out on the prisoners. 10 for every one. Make it public. I'll bear their hatred just fine. Will he?" "Very well," the captain said, bowing low. "Shall I send in the first of your guests?" "If you must." As the soldier left, Ingram rubbed his eyes. Things had grown so tiresome of late. First, the Wraith was making his life a living torment, and now the mysterious Watcher of Veldaren had to come to his city. As if the elves didn't give him enough trouble. Thinking of the elves, he wondered when their new ambassador would arrive. He'd been told to expect him today. He'd greatly appreciate restarting their talks. The double doors opened, and in walked the two most prosperous and powerful lords of the Remir. Yor Warren, tall and thin, his oval face covered with a beard, and the other, Lord Edgar Moss, muscular and dark-skinned, with 2 elegant rapiers hanging from his belt. Between them, more than half of all lands that stretched from the southern coast up to the King's Strip were within their power. There were other lords, minor nobles and owners of land, but Ingram knew they were all in either yours or Edgar's pockets. Both men bowed to Ingram, who gestured for them to continue. "We've come as you've requested," said Yor. "Did the elves finally gain some sense and accept our proposals?" "Not quite," Ingram said, leaving his throne. The 3 took a seat at one of the 2 tables in the room, with servants rapidly appearing to pour them drinks and bring them small meats and breads to eat. "Then what are we to do?" asked Edgar. His fingers twirled the hilt of a rapier as if by habit. "Every week I must replace men riddled with arrows, all because they don't want us to chop down a few trees or set foot in their sacred lands. Sacred? What a joke!" "You're better off than I am," said Yor. "If my peasants even step within bow-shot of the Erzay forest, they get an arrow through their throat." "I understand the difficulty," Ingram said, sighing. "But King Edwin refuses to declare war. In this our hands are tied. We must reach a favorable agreement with the elves, for if we provoke battle, the king will not come to our aid. Only if the elves seem the aggressor, will he bother. Edwin knows of their aggressive defense, yet does nothing." "Probably thinks it's our own damn fault," Yor muttered. Edgar sipped his wine. "Given what those pointy-eared bastards went through over in Mordan, it doesn't surprise me. Still, such aggression needs to be punished. They came into our lands, built their home in our forests, and now deem them sacred without need to share? How else are we to build our homes, our ships?" "Their ambassador should come today," Ingram said. "We must show strength and back down on nothing. The prosperity of our city depends on the resources they covet. King Edwin is a young, easily frightened brat. He'll insist we handle this ourselves and leave us to our fates. But if the elves leave their forests and begin burning fields and villages, he will have no choice but to interfere." "We play a dangerous game," Yor said. "How do we know Edwin won't leave us to our fates instead of embroiling Neldar in war?" Ingram chuckled and shook his head, thoroughly amused. "Because our king is human, Edgar. No human would dare side with a lying, deceitful, worthless race of elves over his own kind, not when they have a choice. That's as it should be, and how we must proceed in all matters with these heathen creatures. Let them worship the stars and trees like fools. We serve the true gods. Our progress is inevitable. King Baden figured this out. He burned Desiree to the ground and sent the Desrin elves fleeing east toward our homes, our lands. If we are strong, we will one day achieve a victory far greater than that." A soft clang marked the opening of a side door, and in stepped the captain of the guard. "The elven ambassador has arrived at the gates of the city," he said, saluting. "Shall I let him in?" "Send him this way," Ingram said, pushing away his plate and standing. "Be firm, you two, and do not hide your anger when we make our demands. Such prideful creatures. The elves cannot stand being treated as they should. Use it to our advantage." They waited, fixing their clothes and making sure they stood just right. When the double doors opened, Ingram went to greet the ambassador. "Welcome to our city," he said, all smiles. The elf was slender and tall for his race. Flowing emerald robes brushed against the stone floor as he stepped inside, and his sleeves fell low when he gracefully bowed. His hair was long and golden, his eyes a vibrant green. "Greetings, Lord and ruler of Angelport," said the ambassador. "My name is Graven Trill, and I have come from Quelazar to seek peace with men." "As do we also seek peace," Ingram said, not bowing and hoping the ambassador would notice the slight. "Please, let me introduce my companions. This is Lord Yor Warren, who rules the northern reaches of my land. To my left is Lord Edgar Moss, in charge of the west. They have the most experience when dealing with your kind." Graven bowed a second time. "Your names are familiar to me," he said. "I greet you, and wish Celestia's grace upon you both." "Flattered," Yor said dryly. "I'm sure your trip was long," Ingram said, letting a hard edge creep into his voice. "But given the many deaths our loyal citizens suffered by the tips of your arrows, I would like to begin negotiations as soon as possible." "I agree," said Graven, "but I do not speak for all elven kind. I only come to prepare the way for the lady who shall. Our Nehevar has sent Larissa Sinistel to meet with you and has given her authority to speak in his name." Ingram felt his heart jump. "Larissa?" he asked, trying to show no emotion. "Your king has sent his daughter here?" "Nehevar, not king," corrected Graven. "And yes, she should arrive in a few hours, and I come to ask permission for her and her escort to enter within your walls." "Wait one moment," Yor interrupted. "How large an escort?" "Large," said Graven, "along with Sildur Kinstel, Maradun Fey, and their own escorts. Surely you understand, given our concerns for safety." Ingram felt ready to explode. That damned wraith had killed the last elven ambassador, and while Ingram had been amused at first, now he wished to throttle the strange assassin. To have someone as important as Larissa within his grasp could mean everything, but to invite that many bodyguards, all on high alert, sickened him. Elves walking freely within his walls, doing untold damage with their blades, bows, and poisons. Gods! What if they spent their seed among the loose women and whores about the docks? What bastard children might one day inhabit his city? "Can you swear to the safety of my people?" he asked, but the words felt hollow, as if the promises of an elf meant anything. "I can promise nothing," Graven said. "Only that they are here for protection and nothing more. I do not want to imagine the consequences if something should happen to one of our wise leaders." It didn't take much to imagine what those consequences were, of course. "Where is it you will stay?" Ingram asked. "We have been graciously offered a place by one of your city's fine men. I assume this will not be a problem?" "Of course not." Despite the bad taste it left in his mouth, he smiled and bowed once more. "Let us resume talks tomorrow. Make sure you send someone to let us know where you will be staying, so I might send servants to tell you when we will convene. We'll meet here, your representatives, mine, and the merchant lords." Graven spun on his heels and headed for the door. When it closed, Ingram stalked back to his throne, sat upon it, and shouted for a drink. "Hardly the angry display I was told to expect," Edgar said, unable to conceal his sarcasm. "Shut up, you fool," Ingram said, gulping down his wine. "This changes everything. Larissa did not come here without reason. Shadowdance is playing games, and we must discover his aims. I'll save my anger for the morrow, when they are together. Besides, if something should happen to her, something no fault of our own. But enough of that. Send word to your camps, both of you. I want their forests crawling with men. I don't care how many die, so long as they learn that we will never, ever stop. Oh, and find out who that damned traitor is that's willing to house the elves." The two lords bowed, and Ingram dismissed them with a wave. It wasn't until they were gone that Ingram realized Graven had not bowed before his exit. Such disrespect left him calling for more wine and wishing he had loosed his temper on the ambassador after all. That same morning, Haern joined Elisa and Zusa as they walked amid the hundreds of shops lining the roads just north of the docks. "I'd prefer the few extra hours of sleep," Haern said as they looked at a strange assortment of dresses, whose cost he couldn't even begin to guess. Forget cost, thought Haern. He couldn't even decide which was the front and which was the back. Never before had he been so keenly aware of how secluded a life he led. Here in Angelport he saw styles from all 4 nations, tattoos drawn in bright colors, and animals in cages he had only heard of in passing. All his life he danced in the underworld of Eldarin, oblivious to the greater world beyond its walls. Still, that didn't change the fact he'd rather be sleeping than keeping up his facade of being newlyweds with Zusa. "Come, husband," she said, flashing him a smile, looking beautiful in a red dress that left her shoulders naked. "You treat me so distantly. Has our passion already faded?" Haern hurried past a merchant selling a brightly colored bird with a silver beak. "I can't imagine so. Ours was a marriage made for the ages." She snickered, then grabbed his hand. "For sure," she said, winking. Haern shook his head and laughed. "You're lucky you're beautiful," he said. Zusa's smile lost its joy, and he saw her exchange a look with Elisa. "Yes," said Zusa. "Lucky." Haern didn't understand, but Zusa offered nothing more, so Haern let his mind wander. Watching for thieves kept most of his attention. They were everywhere, lurking in corners, doorways, and the sides of stalls. They had a look to them, a wariness they could not hide from someone so familiar with their ways as Haern. Twice he'd caught a man sliding through the crowd, spotted the mark, and then put himself in the way. The first one he'd ask for directions, letting the noble lady move on to a much more occupied booth. The second time, Haern only grabbed the man's arm and smiled. "Lay off," the thief said, yanking free. "Pardon me," Haern said, grinning while still blocking his way. "I thought you were someone else." By the time he let the thief free, the mark was gone. Zusa chided him for being childish. "You cannot stop every crime," she said, squeezing his hand. "The world is bigger than you." "I can at least stop the ones I see." "Even that will one day kill you. We are not in Eldarin. And right now, you are not the Watcher. Relax. We're supposed to be in love, remember?" He chuckled, and he felt his neck flush despite himself. "Right," he said. "How could I forget?" They rejoined Elisa's side and continued browsing the selection. At one stall, Haern finally found something that caught his interest. A wide variety of swords, all exquisitely made. He was holding one, examining its hilt, when he heard a loud cry from the guards. "What was that?" Haern asked the shopkeeper. "Sounds like a hanging," the burly smith said. "You look new here, so go take a gander." Shame I'll miss the fun, selling wares and all. Haern replaced the sword, tilted his head in a manner of respect Elisa had showed him, then returned to Zeus's side. They were already making their way north, toward a large open square. You hear it too? She asked him. Partly. Zeus shot him a glance. They're calling for the Watcher. Elisa crossed her arms and leaned closer to the two, so she might not be overheard among the din. Do not interfere, she said. Watch, and watch only. If either of you are revealed, the blame will fall upon me for bringing you here. I have no intention of spending my stay here in a dungeon. Watcher! The city guard cried again, a single man bellowing above the crowd. He stood atop a wooden platform, with 5 nooses hanging behind him. Haern felt his mouth go dry as a row of dirty, malnourished men ascended the stairs, their arms tied behind their backs. Watcher of Veldaren, come forth! What's going on here? Haern asked. Isn't it obvious? Zusa whispered. Perhaps it was, but Haern didn't want to believe it. The crowd quieted as the guard began crying out anew. Worse was the tattoo he saw on the city guard's face. The same tattoo many of the city guard wore. A sword across the right eye. Murderer, coward, and butcher known as Veldaren's Watcher, know that Angel Port is no place for you. We will not accept your presence. Last night, you slew 2 of our city guard and harmed a 3rd. For every innocent man you attack, 10 from our dungeons shall hang. So declares Lord Ingram Murband. The crowd let up a cheer at the hooded executioner's arrival. As he slipped noose after noose over the heads of prisoners, Haern felt his hands shake. How dare they? He whispered. Zusa squeezed his hand tight. Criminals, she said. Outlaws. Their lives are nothing. Once bags were over their heads, the executioner stepped down and circled around to the back of the platform. Hanging underneath were ropes attached to thick planks of wood. With a pull on a rope, it'd drop open, allowing the man or woman above to fall. Meanwhile, the city guard walked from person to person, shouting out their crimes. Murderer, thief, rapist. The crowd cheered as the executioner took the first rope and wrapped it around his beefy arm. He pulled, and the man dropped. Not in my name, Haern whispered. Damn it, not in my name. One after another, the executioner pulled the ropes until all 5 were dead. We killed gods, he said, feeling his insides roil. Not thieves. Gods. We didn't know, Zusa insisted. It didn't matter. 2 dead guards and a 3rd left alive to deliver his message. 30 men and women to die in return. Haern's rage grew, and he tried to let go of her hand. She refused, instead pulling him closer. Elisa glanced over, her face coldly passive, but she said nothing. No, Zusa whispered. Accept no blame, Haern. Stand and watch. This is the path we chose, and we will bear the consequence of our mistake together. 5 more, their crimes read. The crowd cheered. The executioner did his work, and then they hung. As the bodies were carted off and the next set brought on, Haern listened to their crimes. Avoiding taxes, striking a guard, stealing food, speaking ill of Lord Murband. They were hanged like the rest. Still, the crowd cheered. I can stop it, Haern said. His sabers were clipped to his belt, and every part of him screamed to draw them from their sheaths. I can kill them all. You will die, Zusa said. It doesn't matter. I could still... No. Asher, help us. They cannot... 2 of the next 5 were children, no older than 10. The executioner had them stand on stools above the trapdoors. They were called thieves as their heads were covered with bloody cloths. When the first rope pulled, Haern took a step forward. It didn't matter he had no disguise. It didn't matter there were hundreds of guards crawling about. Another child still stood with a noose about his neck. "No!" Zusa cried, blocking Haern's way and grabbing his head with her hands. He clutched her wrists, but she was strong. They stared face to face, Haern nearly delirious with anger. Her gaze held him, the force of her will incredible. "We are the ones who own the night," she said, pressing her forehead against his. "We are the ones with blood on our hands. Look at me, just me. Ignore all else. We are the Reapers, the demons, the dark shadows wielding steel. We will not be denied our vengeance. But it is not now." The crowd cheered, and he felt oblivious to them, lost in a sea of dirty faces and black hearts. Her eyes were beautiful, though, and he wished he could lose himself within. But even there, he saw the child drop, the noose snap taut, followed by the image of that other lone child in Valderan. Not his fault, he'd told himself then. Not his fault, he tried to say now. But it was. The dead belonged to him. "When?" he asked, trying to control his fury. "And how can we do what must be done when every guilty man I kill leads 10 more innocents to their deaths?" Zusa offered no answer. Alisa stepped between them, and she motioned for them to go. "I know what you're thinking," she said as they left the gallows. "But you cannot let Ingram's madness deter you. The Wraith must be found and killed." "And what of Ingram?" Haern asked. "Do you think I'll let such an act slide?" "He killed thieves and criminals to send a message, same as you. You're hardly any more innocent than him, Haern. Don't get yourself killed trying to prove otherwise." Her words stung far deeper than she could have possibly known. Haern pulled away from Zusa and stormed off. Zusa called his name, but he ignored her. "Are you watching, Watcher?" the city guard cried behind him. "Do you see the fruits of your labors?" He did. Enough of it, anyway. Wanting to be as far away as possible, he wandered the streets north, toward Angelport's entrance. On his way, a thief, probably not even out of his teens, slipped beside him and reached for the coin purse in his pocket. Haern's first instinct was to reach for his sabers, his first desire one of bloodshed, but the realization chilled him to the bone. So instead he slapped the thief's hand away, whirled, and grabbed his throat. "You should be dead," Haern said. "Now go." "Fuck you, mister," the thief said, knocking over 2 other kids as he fell back. His demeanor weakened at the fury in Haern's eyes, and he fled down the street without another word. Haern glanced at his clothes, fine silk and soft cotton, and realized he looked like a noble. More than ever he wished to return, put on his old clothes, and vanish amid Valderan's crowds. Not wanting to be anywhere near the Keenan mansion, he passed through a second gate. The guards let him go with only a salute, but the same could not be said for those whose clothes were stained with dirt and whose hands bore the calluses of the docks. "That's a good lady," one of the guards said to a mother, dumping half of her collection of coins into his palm before tossing the worn bag at her feet. "Even whores need to pay their taxes, aye?" The woman nodded, her heart clearly not in arguing. Haern swallowed hard, and his hands itched to draw steel. The thought of 10 more swinging from the gallows moved him on. His walk took him to the city gates, and he heard a growing commotion near them. Mildly curious, he wandered closer. As he did, the crowd parted to either side of the road. Not wishing to stand out, Haern did the same. A trumpet sounded, and then he saw the first of the elves. They walked with their heads held high, their fine clothing glittering in the sunlight. They wore earthen tones, greens and browns, but the fabric was highlighted with gold trim, their belts shining with silver buckles, their ears glimmering with emerald rings. Among them were the warriors, their leather armor well-oiled and intricately decorated. Large swords hung from their backs, except for those wielding bows slung over their shoulders. Among them were elf men and women riding horseback, their lords and leaders, all heavily flanked by warriors. Haern stood in awe of the spectacle. He could only begin to guess why they had come. He counted at least 100, closer to 2. At first, the human crowds watched, also in awe of the wealth and majesty before them. Then came the many shouts, first hesitant and from the back, but the anger and hatred spread like wildfire. "Murderers!" they shouted. "Heathens! Butchers!" Haern could hardly believe what he heard. They cried against the foreign elves, deeming them murderers, even as their own lord hung 30 people for crimes not their own? Was this the true face of the city? "Why such protest?" he asked a man next to him. He'd kept his calm, unlike most others. "They're killing our friends and families," said the man, "but they can't hide in their forests forever, not when we want what they have." "Do you not share the crowd's anger?" "No point. Their time's over. They can ride in all high and mighty, but it won't change nothing. Besides, they don't hurt my business any." "And what is that?" Haern asked. The man chuckled, and he turned to leave. "I build the coffins," he said. "There's always enough wood for that." A few brave souls began throwing stones. The elves ignored them, reacting only when one came too close. The warriors would reach for their swords and move with such precision the crowd scattered. Hearing the shouts and seeing the bruises build across the warriors' faces as the rocks came down like hail, Haern's gut filled with venom. In all of Angelport he saw little kindness, little worth saving. Worse, he knew Valderin was no different. He'd grown up there, and familiarity had blinded him. But here he saw vileness, cruelty, and such a callous attitude toward life it stabbed straight to his heart. These were the people he'd struggled to protect? These were the ones for whom he spent years of his life freeing from his father's war against the Trifect? What was it he'd truly accomplished? Anything at all? Come his death, it had all come crashing down. Everywhere men were the same, and he knew their nature well. But worse were Elisa's words, painting him in a light he'd hidden from, revealing a self he never wished to see. "He killed thieves and criminals to send a message, same as you." Was he the same? Was that the carnage he unleashed, all to the cheers of the populace as he left corpses in their gutters so they might pretend to safety and justice? Once he'd thought himself a monster, the monster his city needed. But as a ruthless peace had settled over Valderin, he'd allowed himself to believe he'd become something more. The King's Watcher. Such a joke. The hood he wore. The man upon the gallows had worn the same. The King's Executioner. That should be his name. "No," he whispered as the elves vanished around the corner, out of sight because of the mob. "I am not the same. I cannot be. I escaped that fate." Hollow words that did nothing to ease his troubled mind. But what did give him relief was the thought that, come nightfall, he'd pay Lord Ingram a visit and show him how dangerous a monster the Watcher could truly be. Chapter 6. Ulrich drank a glass of whiskey to chase away the lingering effects of the violet. He'd taken half a leaf in the morning, more than the quarter he usually allocated. Supplies were incredibly limited, but if everything went well over the next few weeks, he'd be buried in the rare leaf. When he left his mansion, he found his brother waiting for him outside the gate. "About time you're ready," Stern said. "Who are you now? Our mother?" "Mother rests in a deep grave. I have no intention of being her for a very long time." Ulrich laughed, then caught his brother staring at his eyes. "What?" he asked. "I'm no fool," Stern said. "I can see the yellow in your veins. You're addicted to the violet. Nonsense, Ulrich said, brushing his brother aside. Keep your damn opinions to yourself. What I do on my time is my own business, not yours. And you're a fool for thinking I'd be weak enough to become slave to a plant. As you wish, Stern said, but Ulrich could hear the condescension in his voice, and it irritated him to no end. They walked down the street, passing unquestioned through one of the interior city gates. When they came to the docks, they entered an unremarkable building titled Port and Loan. Inside led to a small entryway guarded by 2 men in chainmail. The rest are waiting for you, my lords, said one. Stern nodded, then glanced over at Ulrich. If the room's dark, they shouldn't notice, he said, once again referring to his eyes. I know you're still upset about Julie, Ulrich said, biting down his initial retort. But keep your head up high. We Black Waters never show weakness. They might press hard to change your mind if they think you're still grieving. As you so eloquently put it, keep your damn opinions to yourself. Ulrich grabbed his arm, stopping him from pushing in the door. This is serious, he said, meeting his brother's eye. We've Tory set to one day inherit the Keenan wealth from Madeline. The others will wonder where your allegiances now lie. Is it with us or her? The trifect is a disease, Stern said, pulling free his arm. Freeing Tory from their influence is the best thing I could ever do for her. Anyone doubting my intentions does so at their own peril. Right now, running someone through with a sword would do wonders for my mood. Now come on. Stern entered the gathering room, and Ulrich followed. The space inside was grand, shaped into an oval with an abundance of empty space. A map of the known world was painted across the walls, the seas finely detailed and interlaced with many monsters and fish, both real and fantastical. In the center of the room was a circular table, and despite its size, it had only 6 chairs, all equidistant from each other. The Blackwater brothers took their seats and greeted the other 4 merchant lords. Unlike true lords, they owned no lands and had been granted no official power by the king. But the vast majority of ships that sailed the seas belonged to them, and for several decades their family had banded together, uniting against a common enemy, the trifect. Their eldest, an official leader of gatherings, was Warwick's son, a salty old man who had spent half his life on the ocean. The latter half he'd spent indoors, reaping the bounty of his impressive fleets carrying the sun banner. His white beard was braided tight and decorated with beads of gold and silver. Warwick stood in greeting, and the others followed suit. Beside him, looking young and out of place, was Flint Amour, the firstborn son of the deceased William. Recently entering his 20s, he had a box beard that was thin and unimpressive, but he sported a healthy tan from his many hours upon the boats. Ulrich was glad to see him as William's successor. Flint was rumored to be the toughest of the lot, and that was exactly what they wanted among their ranks. "Glad for you to finally join us," Aaron Goldsail said to Ulrich as they entered, flashing them an earnest smile. Years of experience had taught Ulrich just how fake that smile was. "I was beginning to think you'd chosen to stay among more feminine company instead of attending your own meeting." Aaron was thin and pale, having never once sailed across open waters. He was an excellent barterer, though, and had a way of making a man agree to twice what he intended, yet simultaneously feel he had the better deal. While the others controlled ships, Aaron had contacts and trade routes stretching across all 4 nations of Desrel. "It takes time to please that many ladies," Ulrich said, accepting a drink from one of the many servants lingering near the walls. "Isn't that right, Durgo?" The last of them, Durgo Flynn, rolled his eyes. He was a giant of a man and dark-skinned, yet he spoke with a soft voice. For several years, Ulrich had carefully spread rumors the man preferred the company of little boys to grown women. He had no clue if it was true or not, but it amused him and pissed off Durgo immensely. Together, the 6 were the merchant lords of Angelport. With power derived from their wealth and ships, not position or birth, Ulrich knew every single one sported a chip on their shoulder and a desire to prove their influence. He himself was no exception. Every meeting of the merchant lords was a great clash of egos. For someone like Ulrich, it was also an incredibly amusing game.
"Things have changed since our last meeting,"
Warwick said, always one to keep things on task.
"First and foremost, we welcome a new man to our table. Listen well, Flint, and ask questions if you must. We do not know how much your father told you of our dealings, and would prefer you to make wise decisions instead of rash, unfounded ones just to hide your ignorance."
"Thank you," Flint said, bowing his head respectfully. "I will do my best to be a boon to this council." "Keep the calm cleaned out of your ears, and you'll be a better man than your father," Durgo said. Ulrich hid his laugh with his palm. Flint flushed red and said nothing. William had been considered one of the more slow-minded merchants and was poorly received by the other 5. His death was no great loss. "Let us not disrespect the dead," Stern said, his harsh tone startling the rest. "Besides, his death is why we're here. Twice now this man known as the Wraith has struck at us. First my daughter, and now William. What are we to do about it?" "What can we do about it?" asked Haern, picking at one of his smooth fingernails. "The Keenans have already put out a tremendous bounty, and his mercenaries have scoured every corner of every street. If that Wraith's not been found yet, there's little we can do to help matters." "We are masters of places in Angelport the Trifect doesn't even know exist," Durgo said. "I say we put up our own bounty, as well as some of our men. I won't be losing my head next."
"We are ignoring the larger question," Warwick said, and he squinted in the candlelight. "Why has he targeted us at all? I thought perhaps the Trifect had hired him, but then why kill Laurie's son?"
"What about Ingram?" Flint asked. The others sighed or rolled their eyes, with only Warwick remaining patient.
"Lord Murban's rule on Angelport is tenuous at best," the old man explained. "He would not dare make enemies of both us and the Trifect. With just temporary cooperation, we could cast him out with nary a bead of sweat on our brows. The king may grant Ingram lands, but it is we who control the money and trade."
"Then what of the elves?" Ulrich asked. "Perhaps they wish to weaken our resolve?" "Perhaps," Haern said. "But then why kill their own ambassador and maim another elf outside the city?" Ulrich shrugged. "Elves are liars. We have little proof that events transpired as they claim." Warwick shook his head and lifted his hand so the others would pause for him to speak.
"No," he said. "I fear we have a murderer who owes allegiance to none. He kills elves, Trifect, and merchants alike. In this, he is a greater threat than any other we have faced before. He has made no demands, offered no ransoms, and left us guessing his motives. Hunt him down and execute him. I call for the hiring of skilled men to end this threat. Do any object?"
None did, for despite their bickering, Ulrich knew that a threat against one was a threat against all. It couldn't be allowed. Warwick called over a servant with a ream of parchment, a quill, and an inkwell. He carefully recorded Warwick's orders, then faded back into the shadows among the walls. As the discussion stalled, Ulrich called for more wine. For some reason, he found himself incredibly thirsty, and the strawberry flavor tasted divine on his tongue.
"Putting aside this wraith," Warwick said, "we have another test of our influence. Our men scour the Quellan forest for violet, but our casualties increase daily, and the amount brought back is too little for real exportation. From what I see, we have 3 options. Either we receive significant concessions from the elves, reach an acceptable trade agreement, or abandon the project altogether. Tomorrow we meet with Ingram, the Trifect, and the new elven representative. Come then, We must decide our most profitable fate.
Ingram is easily manipulated, Haern said. I have no fears there.
What of the trifect?
Durgo asked, looking to the two Blackwater brothers.
Lore is shaken up by the loss of his son,
Ulrich said, stealing a glance at Stern.
I think he'll side with whatever ends this nonsense the quickest. As for Elisa, that girl is lightning with tits. There's no predicting her.
And the elves? Asked Warwick. It doesn't matter, Stern said, looking as if he were forcing himself out of a daze. If we keep the right lords bribed, Ingram won't be able to stop war from approaching. Long as loggers and hunters press the forest boundaries, the conflict will escalate. The elves will eventually appease us, or risk extermination in a long, bloody conflict.
And what if they choose war? Flint asked.
A good question, said Haern. Surely a middle ground would be easier for the elves to accept. We need not grow the violet ourselves if the elves give it willingly. Ulrich shook his head.
The elves cannot realize the violet is the true reason for this conflict. Demand for food to live on and lumber to build ships and homes is something they cannot deny without looking petty. But a simple weed? We lose our pedestal. If it must come to war, then let it come to war. We'd profit from it, like we profit from everything. Now, if you'll forgive my audacity, I request the right to represent us tomorrow at the meeting.
You? Warwick asked, lifting his bushy eyebrows.
Why is that?
Ulrich thought of Zusa, and how she would most likely be with Elisa, or at least nearby.
Because we need someone who won't put up with shit from anyone, he said. You all know I'm the one for that.
Perhaps I would be better for so delicate a matter, Haern said.
Only you would think so, Goldsail, said Ulrich. This isn't a barter, not anymore. It's time we make demands, and make them realize we control this city. I want my violet. Once we have it, everything else crumbles at our feet. Ingram, the trifect, the elves. I won't risk losing a single scrap of that victory. Put it to a vote, now.
Warwick shrugged his bony shoulders.
All who favor Ulrich Blackwater speaking for the merchant lords, lift your hand.
Flint was first, immediately endearing the kid to Ulrich, who of course voted for himself.
Two more,
he thought, glancing about the table. Haern refused to meet his eyes, which was answer enough. Warwick stayed back, to vote last as he always did. Durgo crossed his arms, not looking pleased at all. Stern finally lifted his hand, and Ulrich tried to hold back his anger at such a delay. How could his own brother not trust him so?
Will there be any others?
Warwick asked.
Then so be it. I cast my vote for you as well, Ulrich, though I do so with a heavy heart. It is one thing to chase gold, another to be blinded by it. The violet may bring us wealth unimaginable, but it also may lead us to our doom. Acknowledge that threat.
Of course, Ulrich said, all smiles. The major issues decided, they closed a few more minor points of contention, then ended the meeting. As Ulrich was heading out, last to arrive and first to leave, as always, Flint hurried to catch up with him.
I'm not scared of war, Flint said, earning him a raised eyebrow. Is that so? Ulrich asked, a little puzzled.
I asked back there only because I'm still trying to learn, but I'm not my father. I am not afraid of the elves. No matter what they say, I know they killed my... I have no intention of making deals with those backstabbing monsters. Whatever you need, know the Amours are behind you. Ulrich smiled, and he clapped the young man on the back.
How solid is your rule over your family's estate?
He asked. Flint's cheeks flushed. I have many brothers, he said.
If anyone gives you too much trouble, you come to me. Consider that a favor for your help.
Flint nodded, looking relieved. I will, he said, and smiled.
Such an eager kid, thought Ulrich. Good thing he got to him before Haern did.
Come on, he said, glancing back to see Stern discussing matters with Warwick in a far corner of the room. He frowned, but then hurried to hide it. We should go find ourselves a place to drink the night away in celebration of your new position as head of the household. Will you not be going with me? Haern asked as he pulled his hood low. Zusa shook her head, sliding her wrappings across her face. Your vengeance upon Ingram is your own. We sent our message, and I will see if the Wraith answers. And if you find him? Zusa shot him a wink. I am capable of killing same as you. Worry about your own life, Haern. He left her there while she continued dressing, feeling a small sense of relief at heading out alone. It was what he knew, what he did best. At the servants' exit, Torgar gave him no nonsense, stepping aside when he saw Haern coming. Try not to die too painfully, the big man muttered. Haern smirked. Zusa will soon follow. Try to behave. He climbed over the wall and ran. The city of Angelport was mostly flat, but overlooking the docks was a man-made hill rising from the water. Atop it was a large and fairly modern-looking mansion with many statues built into various nooks and corners. Its walls were made of a white stone he did not recognize. He was surprised by how poorly guarded the outside was. Easily finding a gap in the patrols, he used the arm of one statue to vault to a second, that of a great bird spreading its wings as if to fly off the roof. Once up there, he searched the windows. He didn't know what this Ingram fellow looked like, but he knew well the mannerisms of the privileged. There would be no other room as large, no place as well decorated as his own. Through the third window he saw an extravagant four-poster bed, red silk curtains along the sides. The window was unlocked, another unimpressive bit of security. Sliding it open, Haern slipped inside, drew his sabers, and hopped onto the bed. The impact startled the man awake. "Wait!" the man said as the tip of a saber pressed against his throat. "Are you Ingram?" Haern asked, keeping his voice a cold whisper. The man was tall but hefty, and when he nodded, his cheeks shook and blood trickled down his neck. His dark hair was long, and it fell across his sweaty face. "Do you know who I am?" Haern asked. "I do," said Ingram, doing a remarkable job at keeping calm. "You're him, aren't you? The Wraith?" Haern felt his professional pride take a jab. Being mistaken for another? An unwelcome first. "No," he said, pressing the tip harder to make sure the man didn't dare cry out for help. "The Watcher. You left me a message. I've come to give you one of my own." "Is that so?" Ingram said. He swallowed, and the motion rubbed the tip up and down his throat. The sensation made him shudder. "I'd think twice about that. Do you really believe I'd provoke you without expecting retaliation?" Haern felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. Ingram was trying to take control of the situation, initiating conversation while acting as if he were the one with greater knowledge. Not the way he wanted the situation to progress at all. "Everyone knows they'll die," Haern whispered, "but that makes them no less prepared. You slaughtered innocent people in my name." "And you killed my guards," Ingram countered. "Ruffians prepared to rob and beat others. A poor excuse for guards." "And those I killed were no better. My dungeons are overcrowded as is. You gave me a fine excuse to thin them out, Watcher." Haern felt his anger flare, and he pulled the saber back to thrust. "Do it, and hundreds more die," Ingram said. He clenched his jaw and stared Haern in the eye while bracing for the killing blow. Haern almost did it. Almost. "How?" he asked. "How will so many die?" Ingram let out a slow sigh of relief. "I've heard many rumors of you, Watcher, but the strangest was that you cared for the commoners. I've given orders to every guard in this city, and my nobles all agreed to do the same, lest they forfeit any chance of inheriting my power. Should I die by your hand, or that of the Wraith, every prisoner in my custody is to be immediately executed, regardless of their crime." Ingram gave him a smile. "As of last count, I have over 400 people locked away in my cells, minus the 30 we removed today." Haern struck him across the face with the hilt of a saber. Instead of showing anger or fear, Ingram laughed. "You really are a weakling, aren't you? Letting a faceless rabble decide your course of action? Shameful." "Why did you do it?" Haern asked. "Why such a display?" "You ask me?" Ingram rolled his eyes. "You appear in my city and kill 2 of my guards, yet ask me why I did it? How about you tell me what you're doing in Angelport? Oh, and keep your damn saber away from my throat if you have no intention of using it." Haern leaned close enough to whisper into Ingram's ear. "You said your orders were only if you were killed." He thrust a saber through Ingram's shoulder, pinning him to his bed. Ingram let out a cry, but Haern smothered it with his hand. "I'm here because another dared challenge me," Haern said as Ingram's struggles ceased. "This fool who calls himself the Wraith will die, and I will be the one to kill him. Last night I thought I killed thieves, not guards, but I do not regret the act. They preyed on the weak, and they deserved to die for it. Until the Wraith is dead, I will prowl the night. Do not try to stop me, nor get in my way. And if you dare consider hanging more innocents—" He yanked out the sword and let the blood drip across Ingram's forehead. "I'm not scared of you," Ingram said, despite his pale face and shaking arms. "You're a coward. I'll fill the gallows with necks, no matter who you kill. Empty my dungeon, and I'll grab people off the streets to swing." "Not another body," Haern said, shaking his head. "Not if you want to live." Ingram laughed. "Come now. This is a gentleman's deal. You now know the cost of doing whatever it is you do. Question is, are you willing to pay it?" His left foot kicked out, ringing a bell Haern could not see underneath the sheets. "Oh, and I'd suggest running," Ingram said. "I did prepare, remember?" Guards burst through the door, all wielding crossbows. Haern turned and dove through the window, furious at his carelessness. He rolled along the roof as bolts whizzed by. Shouts followed him, and he circled about in search of a clear space to leap. The grounds were suddenly crawling with guards. A risky trap, given how vulnerable Ingram had left himself, but it had gone as the Lord had hoped. Crossbow bolts thudded all about him, and torches continually pointed in his direction as he fled. His pulse pounded in his ears as he looked toward the back of the mansion, hoping for an escape. The longer he took, the more guards seemed to appear. He kept his head low and his cloak spread wide, covering as much of his body as he could. The sky was clouded, the night particularly deep. All he needed was a few seconds lost amid the darkness, and he might escape. "This way!" He heard a voice cry out, but it came from the roof, not those chasing along the ground. He looked over to see a shadowy version of himself, clothed in similar garb, only darker, more blacks than grays. In his hand he held a sword, the blade slightly curved. The man's face was hidden by his hood, its recesses so dark only his lips and chin remained visible. He smiled as if incredibly amused by Haern's predicament. "Follow me." This shadow, this mirror, turned and ran along the top of the mansion to its highest point. Once there, he looked back, beckoning. Despite the insanity of it all, despite who he feared this stranger was, Haern followed. The man offered his hand, and Haern took it. "Reach for the heavens," he said before turning and running at blinding speed. Haern kept up, but just barely. Bolts clacked and buried into the roof on either side. They ran down the slanted front of the mansion toward a two-headed monster built above the door. Letting go, the stranger took a step ahead and then leaped off. Haern followed, lifting his hands high as he'd been told. The fence about the mansion was near, and as they sailed over, Haern had a half-second to see the man hook his arms about a rope before he had to mimic the action. It struck his elbows, and he looped an arm about it and hung. "Hurry," the stranger said, swinging once over the rope before dropping beyond the wall. Haern paused a moment, trying to catch his breath. Large trees grew on opposite sides of the mansion gate's entrance, the rope tied to two branches. Instead of following, he climbed to one of the trees and took cover within as another volley of crossbow bolts flew his way. "I said jump," the stranger shouted. "Tell me your name," Haern shouted back. "You should know it, or my opinion of you is greatly overestimated." Haern tried to decide what to do, but in the end, he couldn't stay there, not with armed guards rushing from all sides of the mansion toward him. With a kick of his legs, he leaped over the wall, rolled to absorb the force of the landing, and then pulled up mere feet away from the man he'd been brought to Angelport to kill. "Lead on, Wraith," he said. Wraith's grin grew. "As you wish, Watcher." They ran, two deadly shadows, and left the guards far behind. Chapter 7. Despite what she'd told Haern, Zusa had no intention of searching for the Wraith. She didn't like lying to Haern, but they couldn't trust him yet, despite him remaining true to his word so far. Besides, she had her own business to investigate. Let the King's Watcher deal with an unpredictable animal like the Wraith. Instead, under Elisa's orders, Zusa went to the docks. "Where have you hidden it?" she wondered aloud, overlooking the many docked boats, both grand and small. Creeping closer, she noted the ones she had already checked the previous night, when Haern had thought her out and about slaughtering thieves to alert the Wraith to their presence. Despite her unhappiness with the deception, at least it meant not having accidentally killed more of the city guard. She didn't like the idea of more bodies hanging from the gallows because of her actions any more than Haern did. One by one she went down the docks, lurking in the deep shadows of the starlight. Any boat not owned by the merchant lords she skipped, but they were not many. The ones that were guarded she slipped past. Zusa wanted no commotion alerting any to her search. Crates and cargoes flashed before her eyes, yet as the night wore on, she could not find what she was looking for. By the time she'd checked 20 ships and found nothing of note, she decided she needed a way to narrow down her search. If the merchant lords had any of the violet in Angelport, surely it would be kept well guarded. Focusing solely on the larger boats with visible guards, she continued on. Her first pick was the Fireheart, which she recognized as one of the Blackwater's boats. Elisa had considered him the merchant lord to watch most closely. 3 men stood near the top of the plank leading to the boat. 2 were asleep at their posts, the third leaning against the mast with his arms crossed, watching the water lap against the dock. 2 torches burned from posts halfway up the ramp. Zusa smiled at the setup. No doubt they thought the presence of so many would deter thieves. She almost wished they'd spent some time in Veldaren, among the presence of true thieves. Then they'd realize how little their guard meant. But between Laurie Keenan, the merchant lords, and Lord Murband, all the truly good thieves had abandoned the city for more opportune ground. Zusa loved vulnerable targets. She dove into the water 100 yards away and with careful patience drifted toward the boat. The water was cold, but not enough to cause her any harm unless she stayed in it too long. Unseen, she brushed against the side of the boat and used her hands to steady herself from going underneath. Above, she heard someone snoring. Grabbing her daggers, she closed her eyes and waited. Through her lifelong training, she had gained the ability to traverse between shadows as if they were connected doorways. It took much of her strength, and had become harder after she turned her back on her god Karak. But it could still be done, and upon the boat there were many dark corners. "I deny you," she whispered, amusing herself with the thought of Karak actually hearing her. "But I take your power still." She dove underwater, swam directly beneath the boat, and then kicked toward the surface. Instead of striking the smooth undersurface wood of the vessel, she plunged, wet and disoriented, onto the deck. Taking in her surroundings, she leaped from behind a crate toward the lone alert guard. He'd turned, having heard the thump of her landing but not yet realizing someone had come aboard. Without slowing, she lunged toward him, her daggers leading. One pierced his throat, preventing a death scream. The other slipped through his ribs and into his heart. The man convulsed for a few seconds, then fell limply at her feet. The two sleeping sailors died where they slept, their throats slit. Afterward she paused, listening for any sort of alarm. She heard none, so into the hold below she went. It couldn't have been any more obvious. The hold was empty but for a single, solitary crate. Zeus tested its lid, but it was nailed shut, and she had nothing to open it with. Glancing about, she found a heavy sledgehammer and decided it would do. Surely no one would notice a minor commotion in the hold of a boat, not through its thick wooden walls. Lifting it, she smashed a hole through a side of the crate, then reached within. The crate was half full of small, smooth objects. She pulled one out and examined it. It was a simple leather bag. Curious, she opened its drawstrings. "So, you're the Violet?" she asked, hardly impressed. This was the mysterious leaf threatening the Keenan Crimleaf trade? Just a damn weed. She sealed it, then tied its drawstrings about her wrist. Elisa's request fulfilled, she wondered what to do about the rest. Zusa found some lamp oil stowed in the corner, and she poured it inside, soaking the rest of the violet. Going back up top, she removed a torch from the ramp leading to the ship. With childish glee, she tossed the torch into the crate, which burst into flame. That glee turned to confusion as the smoke billowed into her face, and she breathed in its bitter scent. It hit her like the hammer she'd used to open the crate. Gasping even through the wrappings over her mouth, she crawled for the ladder back up top. Her stomach heaved, and her head felt painfully light. Climbing was a chore, for whenever she released a rung, her hand shook violently. More and more she breathed in the smoke, which had rapidly thickened. Get away, she thought, trying to push through the fog overcoming her mind. Keep moving. Move! When she made it to the deck, she tore away the wrappings from her face, gasped in the clean air, and then vomited over the railing. What have you done to me? She wondered, stealing a glance at the bag tied to her wrist. Smoke had begun billowing from the belly of the ship, and she knew she had little time before streams of sailors and guards came to fight the fire. It was a brotherhood thing. No one let another's ship burn if they could help it. She had to flee, but where? She nearly leaped into the water, figuring she'd swim to a discreet location before coming ashore, but stopped herself at the last moment. Her whole upper body was twitching sporadically, and she feared what might happen if she tried to swim. Like a drunk, she staggered down the plank. Already a guard had come at a steady jog to investigate. "Is there a fire?" he asked, as if he thought Zusa were a victim of it instead of the cause. When he came closer and saw her strange clothing, he tensed and drew his sword. Zusa knew at any other time she could have cut him down, but not now. Panic swirled through her as her muscles twitched with a feeling that almost approached pleasure. Her brain in a fog, with shimmering lines moving into her vision as if sprouting from her neck, she almost lay down right there and succumbed to the sensation. Instead, she swallowed hard, tried to gather her senses, and stumbled on by, ducking underneath the guard's half-hearted swing. "Stop!" he called out. "Fire!" Faster and faster she ran. Her heart hammered in her chest so hard she worried it might burst. Every time she thought to hide in shadows, she saw things there, vague and shapeless. Her outfit, normally excellent at hiding her form in the darkness, now only made her stand out as different from the rest. Gasping in air, she cut down alleys and streets whenever she saw someone approach. Her legs felt numb, yet strangely her feet throbbed. She frequently heard the shouts of men chasing, and at one point even a pack of dogs tracking her scent. "No," she thought, "not real. Think, Zusa. Think!" But she couldn't. The last remnants of pleasure had faded into stark terror that became overwhelming the moment she stopped moving. Her skin itched, as if spiders crawled underneath her wrappings. She had no idea where she was, how far she'd gone. At one point she wanted to tear off all her clothes and let whoever found her do whatever they wished, so long as she didn't have to be afraid of them. Another time she nearly killed the first shape she saw. She'd even drawn her daggers, but there was blood on them, and for some strange reason that frightened her all the more. It was as if her senses had been heightened 100-fold. and everything carried hidden danger. At last she passed a shop that had built a deck across the front. It was low and cramped, but she rolled underneath nonetheless. Finally enveloped in a closed, safe place, she tried to catch her breath. Her heart hammered, and she shivered in wet clothing. She curled her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms tight about them, and waited. Time became meaningless. With each passing moment, her terror subsided, replaced once more by an overwhelming sense of euphoria. Despite her dismal surroundings, she had to fight an impulse to touch herself all over. Teeth clenched, hands gripping her elbows, she rode it out, praying for morning. Come the rise of the sun, she had not slept a wink. Her whole body felt numb, her mouth dry. Her mind was empty, like someone had scooped out her insides with a spoon. All she could think about was shutting her eyes and hoping the blackness that followed would take those feelings away, but she couldn't. Guards might still be searching for whoever set fire to the boat, and she'd appear quite guilty hiding underneath a deck in strange clothing. Crawling out, her clothes covered with crusted dirt, she looked about to decipher her surroundings. Despite what felt like her eternity of running, she was less than a quarter of a mile from the docks. The city was yet to wake, though there was a moderate bustle of activity near the docks. Zusa ran for the Keenan mansion, frustrated with the stiffness of her joints. The bag of violet bounced against her wrist, and she looked at it with far more respect. If any saw her run back, none said anything, and that didn't surprise her. Paranoia seemed to linger in the back of her mind, but she could control it now, keep it at bay. At the front gates of the mansion, she tore off the rest of her facial wrappings and demanded entrance. The 2 guards had been made aware of her stay, and they hurried to open the gate so none might see her. She used the servants' entrance, went directly to her room, and collapsed on her bed. Hoping to fall asleep any moment, she was annoyed to hear the door open, and then Alisa stepped inside. "Are you well?" Alisa asked. "No," Zusa said, and she laughed, for she could think of nothing else to say. "You're soaked," Alisa said, frowning. Her hand pressed against Zusa's forehead. "Feverish, too. Get off the bed. I'll help you undress." Feeling like a sick child, Zusa sat on the edge of the bed as Alisa removed her wrappings one layer at a time. Once Zusa was naked, Alisa pulled a plain white dress over her head. It felt deliciously warm. Only then did she let her roll back onto the bed and underneath the covers. "I found it," Zusa said, nodding toward the bag that now lay on the floor. "I found the violet." Alisa picked up the bag and placed it in a pocket of her dress without looking inside. "Rest now," she said. "I'll hear of what happened when you're well." Her body still occasionally twitching, Zusa sighed deeply, laid her head on the pillow, and tried to rest. "Wait," she said as Alisa was about to leave. "Where's Haern?" Alisa frowned and looked away. "When you're awake," she said, then shut the door, leaving Zusa in blessed darkness. As they left Ingram's mansion behind them, Haern felt his unease growing. Ahead ran the Wraith, his dark twin, the very man he'd been brought to kill. He'd told Ingram the same. Yet why did he keep his sabers sheathed? Why did he follow instead of attack? "You fall behind," the Wraith shouted, glancing back. Despite their exertion, he wasn't even winded, and that faint smile remained. Haern felt challenged, and he increased his pace. He knew he should attack, but 2 things bothered him. Why had the Wraith helped save his life, and why had he sent him a challenge half a country away? He wanted answers. He'd expected to get them at the tip of a saber, but if he could get him talking first. They approached the docks. With the buildings built closer together, the Wraith vaulted to the roof of one, pulling himself up by grabbing the edge with hardly a slow in his momentum. Haern replicated the feat, wishing he were as nimble as Zusa. For her, it was as if she could turn off the inevitable fall back to the ground. They raced along the rooftops, the homes crammed together, the roofs flat but for a slight tilt facing the ocean. When they reached a heavy crossroads separating the rest of the city from the taverns and docks, the Wraith stopped. "You came," he said, smiling nearly ear to ear. Haern nodded, fighting to catch his breath. He kept his voice steady and slow to mask the attempt. "What choice did I have?" The Wraith laughed. "Always a choice. Isn't that the way of men, after all? You could have ignored me. You could have stayed in Veldaren. Instead, you traveled here. Why?" "You're killing innocents, all to send me a message. I couldn't allow it any longer." "Innocent?" Again he laughed. "What do you know of this city, Watcher?" "Nothing. You know nothing, and that is what I've come to show you. Veldaren is a temple of children, compared to here." He gestured to the street below. Wary of a trap, Haern leaned closer to the edge and looked down. 4 men gathered in the alley, all with sword tattoos on their faces. At their feet was a corpse, whose clothes they rifled through, taking any valuables. Haern drew his sabers, furious at the sight. "These men protect the city?" he asked, incredulous. "Ingram's hired any thug with a blade to work for him. Once they were pirates, mercenaries, thieves. Now they are the protectors of the innocent." "Reminds you of someone, yes?" Haern felt his chest tighten. "You know nothing of me, Wraith. I do not shed innocent blood." "Is that what you believe? Well, then, neither do I. How much do you truly know of the Trifect and what it's done? Or how about the merchant lords? You've walked into a fire, Watcher, blind and dumb. I must say, I had higher hopes than this." He gestured to the guards below. "Go. Men rob and take from a murdered man. Give them their due." The Wraith tilted his head at him, staring from beneath that strangely dark hood. Haern thought of the 4 guards and of the 40 that would hang if he took their lives. In Veldaren, he'd have never hesitated. But now... "If I deliver justice for the innocent, more innocents will die," Haern said. "Is that what you've brought me here to learn?" The Wraith shook his head, and there was a hint of disappointment in his sigh. "I thought you were better than that. Deliver justice for the innocent without fear and without remorse. Innocents will always die. The question is, do you let those with power hide behind them forever?" He leaped off the building, his black cloak trailing behind him. Haern leaned over the edge, and he knew he had only a fraction of a second to decide. The 4 guards were below, preparing to dispose of the body in a way that would prevent them any trouble. Upon their deaths, Ingram would hang dozens. Dead innocents. Dead children. Only a fraction of a second, only the slightest hesitation, and then Haern followed after him, his sabers drawn. The Wraith's descent ended in a bloody eruption of gore, as his sword pierced the nearest guard's back, punching through his chest. Upon landing, he spun, yanking the blade free and slashing for a second. It tore through his throat. The guard collapsed to his knees, clutching his neck as it gushed. The Wraith continued spinning, his blade turning on the third. It would have opened his chest, but Haern was there, his sabers blocking the strike. "Get away!" he screamed to the other 2, who needed little encouragement. They fled, all the while crying out for more of the city guard. The smile was gone from the Wraith's face. "You protect guilty men, all because you fear the actions of other guilty men," he said, slowly falling into a stance. "A shame." Haern watched the man's movements carefully. Already he'd seen enough to know he was brutally efficient with his attacks, which came with lightning intensity. The Wraith tilted his sword, shifted a foot, and then lunged. Haern gasped, still surprised by the speed. He blocked the slash for his neck with his left saber while thrusting with his right. The Wraith stepped aside, looped his sword about and thrust again. When he tried to parry it, Haern found the longer blade shifting aim, a subtle dip that threw his entire defense off. Falling back, he smashed the attack aside with both his sabers. In the distance, they heard guards rallying. "Tell me why," Haern said, slowly shifting side to side to get his cloaks into motion. "Why did you summon me? Why am I here?" "I thought you could help me," the wraith said, "but it seems you are not the man I thought you were." Haern spun, flinging his cloaks about. It was a technique he'd perfected over years, a dance as familiar to him as breathing. He let the gray fabric hide his movements, disguise the motion of his hands and the location of his sabers. His cloak dance had only one risk, and that was the brief time he lost sight of the wraith as he turned. On the third rotation, he saw a great puff of smoke where the wraith had been. Haern hesitated, then realized his error. A heel slammed into his back, and he let out a cry of pain. Rolling across the ground, he desperately blocked as the wraith came slashing in, repeatedly battering his sabers so they could never settle into position. The wraith's movements grew faster, and Haern fought solely on instinct, nervous to use the cloak dance again. A high feint fooled him, and in came the wraith's foot, blasting the air from his chest. "You made an entire city fear your name," the wraith said as his sword stabbed and cut. Nothing about him gave away his intentions, and everything about his stance and reactions was unfamiliar. Haern could not fall into a rhythm. The few times he tried to riposte or counter, he found himself stabbing air, or canceling the hit to prevent having his throat slashed open. The sound of steel rang out a chorus, and Haern knew its song was not under his control. "I thought you were the best." The sword tip cut a gash across his arm, just enough to bleed. Haern retreated on instinct, only to realize he'd put his back against a wall. The wraith positioned himself directly across, his legs tensed to lunge. There'd be no escaping. The sword was a blur, and Haern blocked the first 4 hits. The 5th plunged through his shoulder, and he screamed. "I was wrong," the wraith said, twisting the blade, eliciting another scream. "A shame you won't be at my side when I set this city ablaze." A trio of arrows whizzed by, one punching a hole through the wraith's hood. The man freed his sword and fell back as dozens of city guards came rushing in. Haern tried to give chase, but the wraith suddenly darted back at him, his heel smashing into Haern's forehead. His vision a blur, he dropped to the ground, his sabers falling from his lifeless hands. As he lay there, he watched feet march by. Rough hands rolled him onto his back and then yanked off his hood. Haern screamed. It felt like pain was everywhere in his body, yet nowhere in particular. Through the tears in his eyes, he saw men peering down at him, familiar tattoos across their faces. "Sure it's him?" asked one. "Damn sure. I'd be dead if not for him." "Thought he went after Ingram, though." The rest fell silent. Haern tried to ask for water, but his voice came out a mumble. "Take him to the dungeon," said the biggest of the men. "We got time to figure it out." They grabbed Haern by his arms and legs. When they lifted him, his shoulder exploded with waves of agony. He knew 10 different litanies against pain, techniques for hanging on to consciousness no matter how horrible the trauma. Haern used none of them and slipped away. Chapter 8. When Ingram awoke, he was in an irritable mood. His shoulder hurt despite the tonic his healer had given him, preventing any real rest after the Watcher's departure. Once out of bed, he bathed in a tub of hot water prepared by servants while he'd struggled for sleep. After bathing, the healer came and changed the wrappings. "Clean wound," the old man said as he looked it over. "You'll be fine." "Just keep away the infection," Ingram muttered. After he was gone, his captain of the guard stepped inside his bedroom and saluted. What is it you want? Ingram asked.
We have him,
the captain said. The Watcher. Ingram went through the rest of his morning rituals with a smile on his face. Despite the first major meeting with the elves, all he could think about was making his way to the dungeon. Leaving his house, he exited the outer fences accompanied by a small squad of guards. With murderous elves running about his city, he would not travel anywhere unprotected. Dug into the lower side of the hill on which he'd built his mansion was Angel Port's dungeon. It had one entrance, sealed and watched day and night.
He hasn't said a word,
said the guard captain as they opened the gate.
Not that we've questioned him much.
Good, Ingram said. I want him all to myself. How do we capture him? The captain shifted on his feet, looking slightly uncomfortable.
He was protecting 2 of our guards from the Wraith. He saved their lives.
Ingram frowned. Interesting, he said. I'll keep that in mind. Such actions should at least warrant him an honorable death.
If you say so, my lord.
Lamps lit the dim hallway. The cells had a small hole dug into the hill to give them a speck of light. Most had 8 or 10 people within, despite how large the dungeon was. In the far back was the Watcher's cell, small and solitary. He was manacled to the wall with an absurd amount of chains. The jailer had clearly been terrified of the man's potential escape. One was wrapped around his neck, then connected with a thick chain about his waist before being bolted to the wall. Another chain kept his arms above his head, his wrists together, and then looped through a second ring attached to the ceiling. He was on his knees, unable to lie down or stand. His hood had been removed, and Ingram saw a handsome man with blonde hair and blue eyes. A large welt swelled purple in the middle of his forehead. So, we meet again, Ingram said, grinning. I must admit, I didn't think it'd be so soon. Did you kill any more of my guards, Watcher? Or would you care to give me your real name, since I now see your face? The Watcher looked up at him, and Ingram took an involuntary step back. There was something sinister in his gaze, a certainty of retribution that all the chains in the world could not make him feel safe. No wonder the jailer had tied him up so ridiculously. Trying to regain his composure, Ingram smoothed out his shirt, then softly slapped the Watcher across the face. Nothing to say? Well, if not a name, how about a reason? My guard captain says you are protecting 2 of my own from the Wraith. Why's that? You know why, said the Watcher, his voice dry and tired. He nodded to the other cells, where men and women sat dirty in their own filth. Which of them would have hung from your ropes? Ingram scratched at his chin. 20 still will, he said. 2 of my guards died, after all. I like to be a man of my word. And I'll be a man of mine, the Watcher said. Another body, and I will make you suffer. Ingram laughed. A fine feat that'll be. You're here, Watcher, stuck and chained. You couldn't defeat the Wraith, from what I was told. That means you're useless to me. The comment seemed to burn more than Ingram expected, so he prodded further. It is such a shame. To think all your reputation in Valdarin would mean so little in my fair city. The Watcher flung himself against the chains, moving hardly an inch, but causing a loud ruckus. This time, Ingram did not back away, nor show fear. Finally, he was in control. It only seems appropriate. You stab my shoulder, another stabs yours. You won't be given a chance to heal, though. You'll swing from the gallows in full view of the city. I want that Wraith to know what's waiting for him when we capture him, just as we captured you. You won't capture him, the Watcher said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's beyond you and your men. Ingram put his heel on the bound man's shoulder and pressed. Despite the pain, the Watcher showed not the slightest reaction.
"I'm sure many people in Valdarin said the same about you," Ingram said, turning to leave. "But don't worry. I'll proudly bear the scar you left me. In time, memories will fade, and it'll be me who took you down, not some nameless god. Thank you, Watcher. Whatever legacy you had just added to my own."
Ingram left, stopping only to have a word with the jailer.
"Block his window," he said. "I want him in darkness. And have the city guard prepare the gallows. He hangs at sundown."
That matter concluded, he exited the dungeon, only to be surprised by a large contingent of people waiting for him. There didn't seem to be any trouble with them and his guards, but tensions were clearly high. Amid the mercenaries, a lady stepped forth, and she curtsied. Ingram had never met her before, but there was no one else she could be.
"Greetings, Lady Gemcroft," Ingram said. "For what reason have you come to such a dreary place as my dungeon?"
"Rumors, Lord Murband," Elisa said, her good cheer sounding forced. "Fortunate rumors, if they are true. I hear you have caught the man we know in Valdarin as the Watcher." Ingram frowned.
"I see one of my guards has a loose tongue."
"You hanged 30 people as a challenge to him, then caught him in open streets," Elisa said. "Surely you cannot be surprised that people talked."
"Perhaps. Would you like to come up to my study and—"
"No, we can discuss it here. The Watcher is a criminal of Valdarin, where he has slain hundreds of men. I want him in my custody so we may send him back for punishment."
"I assure you, a man hanging in Angelport is just as dead as one hanged in Valdarin, miss."
Elisa's eyes flared at that. "Who said we wanted him hanged?"
"He spilled a lot of blood, Ingram. We'd like a lot spilled in return. I demand him turned over to me at once. I am no miss ashamed to dirty her skirt, nor afraid of the example his death must set." "Demand?"
Ingram could hardly believe what he was hearing.
"You come into my city, my lands, and give me demands? And why should I listen?"
Elisa stepped closer, and she lowered her voice. "Only a fool would willingly make an enemy of the Trifect." Ingram shook his head, the grin spreading across his face not matching the rage he felt in his chest.
"I might have feared you once," he said, gesturing to the many guards about him. "But things have changed, haven't they? The Trifect's power has dwindled, yet the Merchant Lord's has only grown over the past decade. You've wasted coin battling scum in the streets, and while Laurie spent all his attention northward, the merchants have stolen away sailors and trade routes and undercut nearly everything he's built. You don't control me, don't frighten me, and unless you want to find yourself banished, you'd better start showing me the respect an appointed lord of the realm deserves. That son of a bitch hangs at sundown. Do you understand?"
Elisa took a step back. All about, her mercenaries bristled at the outburst. But instead of anger, she only curtsied again. "Forgive me," she said. "If you will not hand him over, I ask that you let me question him first. He may know something of the wraith who killed Laurie's son, and I would prefer to hear everything I can before he goes to his grave." After a deep breath to calm himself, Ingram nodded.
"You may question him as you like, but you go in alone, no mercenaries. If you need to question him harshly, well—"
He leered at her.
"I'm sure you won't mind dirtying your skirt."
She flushed at the comment but refused to take the bait. Instead, she curtsied again, then asked for one of the dungeon guards to lead her within.
"Don't be gone too long,"
Ingram said as she vanished into the dark.
"I'd hate for you to miss our little meeting with the elves."
"Don't worry," she said, glancing back. "I'll be there. After all, it'd be a shame for a war to destroy Angelport. Ingram frowned as she left, then shrugged it off. He wouldn't let her ruin his good mood. The Watcher had been caught, and surely the Wraith would follow. Her comment about war was just petty and ill-informed. Sure, his woodsmen pressed elven borders, but the elves were cowards. Should things turn rough, Ingram felt confident he'd have the upper hand in creating peace. But what if the elves wanted war? Ingram pulled at the collar of his shirt as he walked back to his mansion, suddenly filled with unease. In everything so far, mankind had been the aggressor. But what if something made them change their minds? Close to 200 elves were already within his city walls, and how many more might sneak in at the dead of night in disguise? What if Larissa's arrival wasn't the desperate attempt for peace he first assumed it had been, but instead the moving of troops into enemy territory? Suddenly Elisa's comment didn't seem quite so easy to shrug off. War with the elves would be disastrous. He'd not lied about that to the other lords of the Remir. Ingram could only bluster, posture, and pretend. It'd take an army to fight off the combined power of the elven kind, an army that would take far too long to arrive from the north. "Where are Yor and Edgar?" he asked his captain of the guard, who walked alongside him. "At their homes, I believe." "Fetch them." Ingram looked over a few maps of the Remir while he waited in his study. Everywhere he looked, he saw unguarded farmland the elves might burn. There were a few castles near the reaches of the Desrin and Quellen forests, but they would protect the people, not the crops. Their storehouses could last only a little while under such a vicious siege. King Edwin would come down from Veldarin, but would he arrive in time? Or would the elves starve and burn his beloved Angelport to the ground, with Edwin rescuing only ruins? As he was pondering, the door opened and Lord Edgar stepped inside. "Is there no one else?" he asked, glancing about the study with a hint of nervousness. "Yor should be coming soon," Ingram said. "Tell me, have you discovered who reserved rooms for the elves?" The man crossed his muscular arms and he leaned against a bookshelf. "Whoever it was, they're incredibly careful. Each one had a mercenary come with a bag of gold, either buying or renting the homes so they'd be available for the month. Once the places were cleared and empty, they hired a single person, one per building, to keep it clean." "Do they know anything? A name, at least?" Edgar shook his head. "The mercenary guild's refusing to cooperate. They don't like anyone looking into who hires them." Ingram rolled his eyes. "Grab their guildmaster and throw him in the dungeon. We'll hear a name from him by tomorrow." "You sure that's wise?" Ingram glared, and he felt his temper flare. "If I didn't think it wise, I wouldn't order it done." Edgar bowed to show he meant no offense. Ingram walked over to his desk, sat down, and poured himself a drink. As he did, Edgar wandered closer, eyeing the open maps. "What do you expect from the merchant lords?" he asked. "The elves' desires are quite clear, as are ours and the Trifects. We want food and wood. The Trifect wants to keep the merchant lords from succeeding in anything, and the elves want to shoot us with arrows. But what of them? What does someone like Warwick's son have to do with any of this?" Ingram leaned back in his chair, enjoying the feel of the alcohol burning his throat. "The merchants?" he asked, letting out a sigh. "They've been insistent that the elves make concessions of land as repayment for so many of their workers dying, and the costs suffered because of it. I'm not sure I believe any of it. Sure, they claim the land will further Angelport's growth, and any disruption to the lumber trade will hurt their ever-precious coin flow when it comes to building new boats. Still, there's easier ways to get lumber that don't involve climbing over dozens of bodies.
I understand why you and your struggle with their aggressiveness, but the merchants have so little to do with—" Edgar put his hands behind his back, and he glanced away. Ingram caught the motion and frowned. "Do you have something to say?" he asked. Edgar finally looked him in the eye and nodded. "It's the violet," he said. "The what?" "The violet," Edgar repeated. "It's a plant that grows within the elven forests. If you put it in your mouth and bite down, it intoxicates you, far faster than the strongest whiskey, far more powerful than even the finest of crimleaf." It didn't take long for Ingram to put things together. "They want the land so they can start farming and selling the violet," he said. "I'm certain of it," Edgar said, "and that's why our position is such a difficult one. I tried some of it last night, and I can assure you, they would sell enough to buy a whole kingdom should it reach the masses. But if we accuse the merchants of this being their only reason for involving themselves in matters with the elves, they'll claim we're acting petty and dismissing concerns over the loss of life at elven Eros." Ingram looked at his empty glass, wishing he could simply think more alcohol into it. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Edgar shrugged. "I hadn't tried the violet yet. It was just a hunch, but experiencing that leaf's power, there's a fortune for whoever can sell it in large quantities. I have no doubt now that's what the merchant lords are after, and so far it seems the elves are unaware of this, which is for the best." "So, at least we know their reasons now," Ingram said, setting down the glass. "The question is, how can we use this to our advantage?" "The elves must make concessions of some kind," Edgar said. "I've lost far too many hunters and woodcutters for this to be swept aside. But at least we know now. At least we can watch, perhaps even predict the merchant lord's next action. Until then, I say we keep a unified front." "Indeed," said Ingram, rubbing his hands together. "If it comes to war, they will back down, especially if they feel we will not be the ones to blink as the conflict approaches. Let those merchant bastards rant and rave and pretend to be high and mighty. At least I know why they're being such a pain in my arse." "Indeed," Edgar said, grinning. After 2 knocks, the door opened and in stepped Lord Yor. "Forgive me for my lateness," he said, bowing. "Forgiven," Edgar said, taking a step back from the door and bowing. "Glad for you to join us." "Yes," Ingram said, forcing a smile. "So glad. We were just discussing our meeting with the elves, and the merchant lords in particular."
The air stank of piss, shit, and stagnant water. Despite holding a handkerchief to her nose, the smell made it through with ease. On either side of Elisa, men reached through the bars, jeering and crying out lewd comments and accusations. "Just ignore them," the head jailer said. Hard to do, given how vile the cries became. One called her a cunt who had sucked him off as a child. In return, the jailer spat in his direction. "Take him out and beat him," he told one of his guards. At the far end of the dungeon, in a dimly lit cell wrapped in chains like a cocoon, waited Haern. "I wish to talk to him alone," Elisa said. "Not sure I should leave you," said the jailer. He nodded toward Haern. "That guy's killed a lot of people. You know that. He can hurt you with more than just his hands." "I've made my desires clear, jailer. Would you interfere with my business?" The burly man shook his head.
"It's your life, m'lady. Just don't expect me to take any blame if he breaks something."
He unlocked the cell and gestured for her to enter. After she stepped inside, the door shut behind her, the lock clicking loud enough to send her heart jumping to her throat.
"For safety,"
the jailer said with an ugly smile. Elisa didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction.
"When you want out, just holler. I'll be near."
"Thank you," she said, her voice cold. She put her back to him and took a step closer to Haern. The man looked exhausted, with heavy circles beneath his eyes. A purple bruise swelled across his forehead, and blood seeped from a dirty bandage on his shoulder. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His eyes were unfocused, and they didn't look at her. "I came for you." "What happened last night? How did you end up here? All I heard were rumors you'd been captured, and since you hadn't returned in the morning—" "I fought him," Haern said, finally looking at her. Death hovered in his eyes, and it terrified her. "I fought the Wraith, and I know him now. He wants something, and he'll slaughter every man, woman, and child to get it. Get me out of here, Elisa. For the sake of everyone, the Wraith must die." "I don't know if I can," she said. His gaze hardened, and she took a step back. "Get me out of here," he said again. "I don't care how. No one else can take him, but I can. I'm the only one, and even I might not be strong enough." She looked around the dark cell, then stepped closer. Light from a thin window shone upon her face. "You saved Nathaniel," she told him. "I promise I'll do everything I can. I owe you that at least." Despite all the chains, it looked like a weight lifted off him. "Thank you," he said. Though his face was battered, he still looked handsome, and she gently leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "Don't lose hope," she whispered in his ear. "Even if they slip the noose around your neck, do not lose hope. This isn't how you die." She returned to the cell door, then called out for the jailer. While she waited, she glanced at Haern and fought back a smile. "I told you to stay away from Ingram," she said. Even amid his chains and exhaustion, Haern laughed. Elisa returned to her mercenaries, led by Torgar on reluctant loan. "Take me home," she told him.
"As you wish," Torgar grumbled. "So, what's going to happen with him?"
"He won't die," she said as they walked down the hill toward the street.
"Everyone's got to die sometime."
She shook her head. "He deserves better than that." Torgar chuckled, grabbing his huge sword on his back as if out of reflex.
"Maybe he don't," he said, glaring at a few beggars who eyed Elisa hungrily. "Or maybe he deserves far worse, having killed hundreds of people. Not all of them could have been thieves or murderers. No one's that perfect. Certainly not him."
"It doesn't matter," Elisa said, thinking of her son. "I'll find a way to help him. Keep this to yourself, Torgar. This business is my own, not Laurie's, and not Madeline's." The mercenary shot her a grin.
"I keep my word, lady, but I only give it out when money's involved."
She reached into her pocket and tossed him some coins. He caught them in his beefy hands, his grin spreading.
"Now, that's a good girl," he said.
"There's more I need than just you holding your tongue," she said. When they returned to the mansion, Elisa went into her room and quickly undressed. 2 of Keenan's maidservants came to help her, but she shooed them away. Not that she resented the help, but she didn't want them to see her after she was done changing into her new outfit. The fewer eyes on her, the better. Gone was her expensive dress, diamonds, and jewelry. Instead, she put on a plain pair of slacks, a white shirt, and a small triangular hat currently in style. She'd purchased every item the day before, under the guise of simple gifts for her servants. Finished, she stashed a small sum of silver in her pocket, belted a dagger to her waist, and went to Zusa's room. It was still dark, and she heard heavy breathing from the bed. Elisa slipped to her side and put a hand on her forehead. She still burned with fever. Elisa shook her head. Whatever the faceless woman had endured the night before had taken a hefty toll. There was no way she could rely on her to be ready come nightfall, and even if she was, Haern was a friend and had saved her son. But Zusa was something more, something Elisa would not risk. Still, she had to keep her promise to the Watcher somehow, and that left her with one other option. She closed the door, pulled her hat lower over her face, and headed to the servants' back entrance. Torgar was waiting there as she'd requested.
"Got somewhere secret to be?" he asked.
"Just take me to the gate," she said coldly, "and remember how much I paid you." He patted his pocket, rattling the gold within.
"It'll be hard to forget, not for many glorious nights of drinking and whoring."
"My tongue's yours, milady." She hated his lecherous grin, but she bowed her head and gestured for him to lead the way. Following behind as if she were a simple servant on errand, she kept her head low and did not make eye contact with any of the other guards patrolling the area.
"Stay safe,"
he said when she was at the street, and he shut the gates.
"It's a scary place out there for lonely ladies, especially ones who ain't looking like they should."
Elisa ignored him, and with as much speed as she could muster without looking suspicious, she hurried toward the outer sections of the city. The streets grew less crowded as she moved farther away from the docks and into the slums of Angelport. Most ignored her, only a few tossing her strange looks. Glancing down at her clothes, all spotless and clean, made her realize how naive she'd been. Simply wearing their clothes would not make her look like one of them. Desperately wishing she'd woken Zusa, she continued on, her jaw clenched to hide her growing fear. Her destination was a plain enough building, wood walls withered by the salty winds of the ocean and a heavily slanted roof. She let out a sigh upon seeing it, glad no one appeared to have recognized her. She knocked twice, waited, then knocked twice more. From the opposite side, she heard a click, and then the door swung open. Stepping inside the small building, Elisa removed her hat and bowed. My, said Graven, bowing in return. All around him, the gathered elves glanced their way. "Are you sure it is wise for you to visit us, Lady Gemcroft? Lord Ingram has been struggling mightily to discover who prepared us these rooms directly beneath his nose." Elisa looked about, counting the number of elves in the two-bedroom home. At least 30, if not more. "Forget him," Elisa said, smoothing out her shirt, which had wrinkled from her walk, the cotton inferior in quality than what she was used to. "Are the accommodations sufficient?" "Cramped, but we cannot complain," Graven said. "I doubt Lord Ingram would have given us anything as welcoming. Lice-ridden beds and rat-infested walls do not suit me, nor would staying outside the city like unwelcome invaders." "Though we are unwelcome," said a lady elf who came and gracefully curtsied to Elisa. Her face was slender and smooth, her hair woven into an intricate braid that fell down to her waist. "You are Elisa, yes?" "Indeed," Elisa said, returning the curtsy despite her lack of address. "May I have the pleasure of your name?" "Larissa Sinistel," she said, her voice oddly beautiful, like the soft sound of glass chimes. She wore a green dress shining with sapphires shaped like 100 raindrops. Elisa had to hide her shock upon hearing the name of the elven princess. "Your Highness," she said, bowing low, "I am honored to be in your presence." "You are one of the few in this city to be so honored," Larissa said. "Words of welcome are not what your people gave to us as we entered the walls." She glanced to Graven, who sported a swollen cut above his right eye. "No, they hurled stones and curses. I once thought my people were rash to condemn humans, to be so eager for a cleansing war. Now I wonder." "They are merely scared," Graven said. "They know little beyond what they are told." It is the human leaders we must convince, and they'll make the rest of the populace follow.
Perhaps, Larissa said, and she smiled again at Elisa. But we will discuss this all too soon with Lord Ingram and his various puppets. Let us not worry on this now. Why have you come, Lady Gemcroft? Elisa swallowed and tried to remember every lesson she'd ever been taught. She'd have one chance at this. Originally, she'd thought to pitch it to the elven ambassador. But with Larissa here, it was clear who would be in charge. A friend of mine has been wrongfully imprisoned by Ingram, she began. Who? Asked Graven, interrupting her. A friend, she said, struggling not to glare. I have tried to convince Ingram to turn him over to me, but he refuses. He'll execute him tonight, and I fear I can do nothing to stop him. I know the skill of your warriors. It is almost legendary to us humans. I ask that you free my friend and bring him to me for safety. Larissa's oval face remained perfectly still as she listened, her blue eyes staring. Elisa felt like the young child she was before the ancient elf. When she finished making her request, she crossed her hands behind her back and lowered her head, the best show of humility she could think of. Larissa brushed aside the bangs of her hair, which was so blonde it was almost white. What you ask could spark a war, she said. This friend must mean a lot to you. He once saved my son's life. I must do what I can in return. So honorable, Graven said, and he sounded amused. And foolish, Larissa said. She gestured to the many other elves who lingered about in chairs or sat cross-legged on the floor. We came to prevent a war, yet you would have us openly invite it? Do not deny it. You know the risk in this. Should anyone realize we are responsible for his escape, we risk open battle. Friends and family, people I have known for hundreds of years, might die before my eyes. Is your friend worth that? To you, perhaps, with your life so short it is but a candle. But he is not worth that to me. We are thankful for your hospitality, Lady Gemcroft, but we will not perform such madness in payment. Surely the risk is not so great as that, Graven said, turning to his princess. We could easily dispatch a handful of guards, and if done right, no one will know of any elven involvement. And what will we say if caught? Larissa asked. That we did so at the request of a friend? We do not know this man, and have no interest in him. Any lie we offer will ring hollow, and I refuse to be put into such a position. I am sorry, Elisa, but we can offer no aid. Elisa nodded, first hesitantly, then more firmly. I understand, she said. Forgive me for wasting your time. Time with you is never wasted, Graven said, bowing low. Hurry to your home, Larissa said. Our first meeting with Ingram is soon, and I would wish you there to help us as promised. Of course. Elisa curtsied, put her hat back on, then exited the home. Barely 3 steps out, the door reopened, and Graven appeared. Do not give up hope just yet, he said, walking beside her. You are a powerful woman with many resources. I lament Larissa's hesitance, but we may still help, if only in secret. Should you rescue your friend and need a place for him to hide? I'll keep it in mind, she said, trying to disguise her impatience.